sterk wind en dan as ons ook baie reën kry, dan as jou grond 'n bietjie uitgetrap is, dan bevorder dit ook die water vloei vinniger en dit kan ook gronderosie veroorsaak en veral as daar 'n klomp vee in een kamp is, dan word die grond ook, sal ek maar sê, vertrap en dit word ook oorbewys, so dit kan ook gronderosie veroorsaak.
Dink u daar is 'n oplossing vir klimaatsverandering?
Mila, om vir die eerlike waarheid te sê, ons sal eintlik klimaatsverandering nooit kan stopsit nie. Alhoewel ons kan doen wat ons kan doen en wat ons dink wat goed is. En om byvoorbeeld, miskien dit sal baie help is as almal kan gronderosie voorkom, stop ontbossing. Maar soos jy weet, Mila, ons mensdom doen mos maar ons eie ding. So ek dink klimaatsverandering sal ons nooit eintlik gestop kry nie.
My naam is Maria Kotse, maar my naam is Lena. Ek behoort aan die koöperasie. Ek is organiese rooibosteboer en ek is ook 'n lid van die. As ek die woord hoor klimaatsverandering, dan is dit klimaatsverandering is 'n groot woord en dit is amper wat jy kan te wagte wees hier. Dit kan wees droogte, soos byvoorbeeld donderstorms en vloede.
Is klimaatsverandering 'n positiewe of 'n negatiewe aspek op u plaas of op die plaas?
Negatief omrede is dat dit 'n uitwerking op die rooibostie en nie net op die rooibostie nie, op alle plante en ook op die mens en ook op die diere.
daai dinge. Kan ons die verskil wees aan klimaatsverandering? Goedemiddag, ik is een persoon wat thans bezig is met ideeën om meer te vinden op klimaatsverandering. Kan ik alsjeblieft bij je een paar vragen?
Reg so. Ek is Margrieta Oktober en ek is woonagtig op Melkraan. Ek is 'n lid van die Hyvel Koöperasie. Ons boer met organiese rooibos. En baie van die lede boer ook met skaap. Ek persoonlik het skaap gehad, maar ons het al ons skaap self gebruik.
Hoe kan ons klimaatsverandering verminderen?
Hoe ons te werk gaan om klimaatsverandering is dat ontbossing ons ons doen ons reg om en die rede hoekom ons die bosse hou in die natuur is om die ons te spoed te beperk.
Wat is die nagevolge van klimaatsverandering?
Die nagevolge van klimaatsverandering kan sien is dat ons as gevolg van ons sterk winde wat ons is dat die sterk winde vat ons kosbare boergrond verby die sterk wind en dan as ons baie reën kry, dan as die grond 'n bietjie uitgetrap is, dan voordat dit ook die water vloei vinniger en dit kan ook sien gronderosie veroorsaak en veral as daar 'n klomp vee in een kamp is, dan word die grond ook, sal ek maar sê, vertrap en dit word ook oorbewys, so dit kan ook gronderosie veroorsaak.
Dink u daar is 'n oplossing vir klimaatsverandering?
Mila, om vir die eerlike waarheid te sê, ons sal eintlik klimaatsverandering nooit kan stopsit nie. Alhoewel ons kan doen wat ons kan doen en wat ons dink wat goed is. En om byvoorbeeld miskien dit sal baie help is as almal kan gronderosie voorkom, stop ontbossing. Maar soos jy weet, Mila, ons mensdom doen mos maar ons eie ding. So ek dink klimaatsverandering sal ons nooit eintlik gestop kry nie.
My naam is Maria Kotse, maar my naam is Lena. Ek behoort aan die Hyvel Koöperasie. Ek is 'n organiese rooibos boer en ek is ook lid van die Hyvel. As ek die woord hoor klimaatsverandering, dan is dit want klimaatsverandering is 'n groot woord en dit is amper 'n skok. Want jy weet nie wat jy kan te wagte wees hier. Dit kan wees droogte, soos byvoorbeeld donderstorms en vloede.
Is klimaatsverandering 'n positiewe of 'n negatiewe aspek op u plaas of op die plaas?
Negatief omrede is dat dit 'n uitwerking op die rooibos en nie net op die rooibos nie, op alle plante en ook op die mens en ook op die diere.
die dinge. Kan ons die verskil wees van klimaatsverandering? Goeiemiddag, ek is Sandra Passon wat tans besig is met ideeë om meer uit te vind oor klimaatsverandering. Kan ek asseblief 'n paar vrae vra?
Reg so. Ek is Margarita Oktober en ek is woonagtig op Melkraan. Ek is 'n lid van die Heivelkoöperasie. Ons boer met organiese rooibostee. En baie van die lede boer ook met skaap by, maar ek persoonlik het skaap gehad, maar ons het al ons skaap, ons vark het ons verkoop en self gebruik.
Hoe kan ons klimaatsverandering verminder?
Hoe ons te werke gaan om klimaatsverandering te verminder, is dat ons ontbos nie, ons doen nie ontbossing nie, en ons ploeg ons lande reg om erosie te voorkom. En die rede hoekom ons die bosse hou in die natuur is om die wind se spoed te breek.
Wat is die nagevolge van klimaatsverandering?
Die nagevolge van klimaatsverandering wat ek kan sien is dat ons as gevolg van ons sterk winde wat ons kry, is dat die sterk winde vat ons kosbare boergrond verby die sterk wind, en dan as ons ook baie reën kry, dan as jou grond 'n bietjie uitgetrap is, dan bevorder dat ook die water vloei vinniger, en dit kan ook gronderosie veroorsaak, en veral as daar 'n klomp vee in een kamp is, sê ons sal eintlik klimaatsverandering nooit kan stopsit nie. Alhoewel
word en dit is amper 'n skok, want
Morning, everyone. Morning. Morning. Okay, we're going to start. Party starting. Okay, let's try that again. As Tafatzwa trained us all yesterday morning. Good morning, everyone. And morning to everyone who's online as well. For those of you that haven't met me, I'm Mandy Barnett from Sandy, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this session this morning. We're doing a little bit of a program shake around where we're going to join, okay, there we go, right. Where we're going to join up the last two sessions, and the flow is going to be as follows. So I'm going to start off with an overview of where did this URP project come from and how does it find itself in the climate finance landscape of the country, and then high level, what have we learned? Then Faith will come in from the National Environment Department and speak about how does the department approach adaptation planning in the country. Then we'll hear from Tafatzwa around scaling and how do we conceptualize this and internalization of the lessons and scaling into bigger programs and bigger projects. And then Mike will come and speak about specifically the Green Climate Fund project that Sandy is currently developing that is scaling up the URP. So we'll try to make it very interesting and not be too information heavy, because actually the most important part of the session is what will happen after the tea break, where we want to do some work with you in surfacing the policy recommendations. So out of everything you've heard from all of us, what we want to know is, what do you recommend for the way forward, and who do you want to hear that message? Okay, essentially that's what a policy recommendation is. It's a suggestion for someone who has the power to make a decision or power to make a rule about how we conduct our business. So we want to spend some time, because this Indaba is actually all about surfacing a set of policy recommendations that are derived from our collective experience. Okay, so that's where we're heading for the day. So very big welcome to all of you this morning. I hope you had a good night. Thank you for being with us the last couple of days. And I hope today is going to be amazing. Okay, so without further ado, lessons from SANBI as the national implementing entity of the Adaptation Fund. So some of us have been here forever from the beginning, you'll know, because we're the ones that are older. And many, and I always say older, not old. That's what I tell my interns, older. And some of you and many of you are the young ones. And it's incredibly inspiring to see all of this new young energy coming into the space. But of course, you don't really know where this has all come from. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining how was the URP born in the first place. And then that tracks into where is this going in terms of the scaling work. So this takes us into a little bit of what is the Adaptation Fund. And you've heard throughout the proceedings that the uMngeni Resilience Project was funded by the Adaptation Fund, but what is it? So the Adaptation Fund is a fund that was created in the international space by a group of countries that came together that said climate change is affecting countries that didn't cause it, if I were to put it very simply. And we need to create a financial instrument to help the vulnerable people in these countries cope with climate change. And initially, the Adaptation Fund was funded by the proceeds of carbon trading under the Kyoto Protocol. It's subsequently been moved under the big climate convention. And it was set up to support developing countries to cope with climate change, only focusing on climate change adaptation. So those of you that work in the climate change space will know that when we speak about climate change, we speak about all the work of slowing it down. That's the mitigation work. New kinds of energy, getting carbon out of the atmosphere, that kind of work. And then because we haven't done so well with the slowing it down and climate change is already happening, there's a program of work to help us adapt. And that's the adaptation work. So it's accepting that climate change is already with us. People that didn't cause it, who are not responsible for it, are already having to cope with what's going on. And that will be increasingly so into the future. And so the program of work on climate change adaptation comes in there. And that's what the Adaptation Fund is all about. Now, they're not only about that, they were about something else that was very interesting. And that was this idea that instead of the funds being accessed by international entities, which is usually the case with these multilateral funds, they would come up with a modality called direct access. And what that means is that they will accredit national entities to be able to work directly with the fund. Okay, and that's called direct access. So it's saying, us developing countries, we don't need international intermediaries to help us connect with the funding. We actually would like to do that ourselves. We know better ourselves what our needs are, what our policies are, how we want to respond. And also, we'd quite like to build that capacity internally. Right? And that's transformative. Remember the conversations yesterday about transformative adaptation and capacity building. Direct access is all about that. So SANBI, all the way back in 2011, was nominated by the then, I think they were called the Department of Environment Affairs, now Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. SANBI was nominated to apply to be South Africa's national implementing entity of the Adaptation Fund, and we succeeded. And it was our work then to get the money from the fund. There was a $10 million cap and off we went. Okay, so this was our long process. I won't go through all of the steps, but essentially from accreditation, we started to set up the governance instruments, a funding framework, a stakeholder consultation process, a steering committee. And after a long process, we received 126 applications and selected the uMngeni Resilience Project as one of the 2 projects we would work with. And then SANBI worked with the Umgungundlovu District Municipality, with UKZN and some others to develop the project proposal. We submitted it to the Adaptation Fund and it was approved in 2015, November 2015. And from November 2015 till September 2023 will be the implementation of the project. Okay, so 8 years. And now you can see how long this takes. From 2011, when we were accredited, all the way through to implementation. And I often think that with the climate change adaptation work, it's a little bit like if you're a tree and you're wanting to not blow over in a hectic wind that's caused by climate change, what do you need? Deep roots. So the investment in process and governance and all of this work that we do to get us ready is about growing these deep roots. So when the projects come, they're strong. And so we go into the scaling process to go, well, what do those deep roots look like? And we've heard a lot of the conversations around, we need to consult better, we need to involve more people, we need to, all of those, it's all about growing our deep process roots so that our projects are robust. Okay, so the uMngeni Resilience Project, I don't have to tell you this now, I think you all know the 4 components: early warning systems, climate-proof settlements and ecological infrastructure, climate resilient agriculture and lessons, $7.5 million, 8 years. It's been quite a journey for all of us that have been involved. Some of us have got older over the process, maybe wiser. One of the things we've been doing all along is following these principles. And those of you that have not come across these before, I would encourage you to Google them. There are the 8 principles for locally led adaptation that have been consolidated by a group of NGOs in the last couple of years, and they are being used to advocate for these kinds of approaches internationally. So they've got 80 countries and organizations that are signatories. South Africa is one of the signatories, and they point to a whole lot of good practice that should underpin the way in which we do our work in theory, okay? And we know real life is different to theory, but the theory that we start out with, or that we aspire for, is that we should be devolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level. And if you're in the international space, often that means just into the countries themselves, because often that even doesn't happen. Building a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty. So how can you respond to climate change if you don't understand what it is in the first place? Providing patient and predictable funding that can be accessed easily. We heard comments about the funders must be flexible. Right? They must respond to what our needs are on the ground and to the changes that happen in the operating environment. We must ensure transparency and accountability. We must address structural inequalities faced by the most vulnerable groups: women, youth, children, disabled people, marginalized groups. We must be flexible in our programming. We must be prepared to learn. We must invest in local capacities to leave institutional legacies. And we must invest in collaborative action and investment. Okay, so all really good ideas, right? And the kinds of things we would all agree with. These have been spoken about time after time after time. And then, of course, we get into the field and things go wrong for a whole lot of very good reasons. And not because we're not all trying our best, and not because we're not people of integrity, and not because we're really committed to making this happen, but because the world is a complicated place. And, you know, I think that's something that we must all expect. If you expect it to be perfect, you're doing the wrong work. If you expect it to be messy, welcome to the world of climate change adaptation. So I wanted to share with you in closing, just a couple of take-home messages from our experience with adaptation 8 years later. Okay, so the first one is that working with climate change adaptation, so CCA's climate change adaptation, is hard and it's incredibly rewarding. So it's a place that's messy. It's a place that will take you to use a whole lot of skill sets that you didn't maybe even know that you had before. And it's incredibly rewarding. Okay, it's a place where you can go into the fields and you can see real people and see the real difference that got made. Okay, it really connects up the science and the policy into people and implementation. And of course, that's why it's messy. It's about whole systems. Okay, so that's the other piece. We often speak about multidisciplinary, cross-sectoral, bringing together different knowledge systems, local and indigenous knowledge with a more formal science systems. Climate change is all about that. You can't work in one part of the system without working in another part of the system if you want to make a change. So that's another big lesson, right? When we design our projects, they will need to be integrated, complex project designs, into complexity, into the challenges that we deal with. And of course, what that means is we all need to be involved. Everybody needs to be involved. Climate change adaptation is about process, because we spoke about that a lot over the last couple of days. People, partnerships, coming together, talking, resolving complicated things, resolving conflict, staying in the river with each other, you know, facing the fire, whatever analogy you want to use, right? It gets tough. And the URP has been all about that. You know, if I look back on the 8 years, there've been many moments where different members of the project team have held their heads going, oh my hat, what are we going to do here? You know, the wings are falling off this plane. And yet the wings are still on the plane. Okay, it's a little bit bumpy and turbulent in places, but we're landing it with all the lessons that we've learned. Okay, so it's about being responsive and adapted. It's about listening, being patient, being respectful. And then the last point here, good process takes time and it's continuous. We don't do the process work in year one and then implement the project, right? We do the process work all the time and we need to resource it properly all the time at all the different levels. All right, then just two more of these. It's about champions. Climate change adaptation is about champions. You know, we often speak about institutional strengthening. And what that actually means is investing in individuals who will be leaders in those institutions. So if you look across at where you're working, in the environments that you're working in, what makes it successful? Those people, those individuals that believe they can make a difference, okay? They don't just look at the ball on the soccer field, they go kick it, okay? And I hope that really those are the young ones, you know, the interns that are in the room, those of you that are starting out your careers, that's what we want you to be, because that's what's needed to build the capacity and make a difference in the space. And finally, climate change adaptation is best led locally by the people who are impacted by it and by the institutions in the countries who are mandated to do this work. Okay, and then that tracks me back to the final point that I want to make here, which is that direct access. Remember what I told you in the beginning, that the innovation of the Adaptation Fund was accrediting national entities to lead this work? Direct access is a very important enabler of climate change adaptation because it allows us to be responsive to national and subnational needs and priorities. We're growing what we're doing out of the policy environments of the country. We hear when things go wrong. We're committed to doing whatever it takes to make things right. We can't go to the next door country if they go wrong. We're in this country, staying here. We're well placed to make the science policy people implementation connections. We're building subnational capacity. We're not bringing people in that afterwards they follow an international career and go somewhere else. We want our people to stay here and be embedded for the long term to make these differences. And of course, supporters of transformative change. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you, colleagues, as an opening set of sparks, hopefully. And I'd like then now to call on Faith to give us the perspective from the DFFE national environment. Thanks, Faith. Okay, so I don't know how we get to yours. Which one is yours, Faith? Just now. Okay. Good.
Okay. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. I'll maneuver around here. Sanmanan. Ninjani. I'm sure everyone can't wait to go home. You all look so beautiful though, even though it's the third day. I'm tired. I'm really tired, but I think I've actually enjoyed myself. Anyone that would say they didn't enjoy themselves, they'll be lying. Okay? I think I honestly did. You said some of us have grown older. And I believe I'm one of those that have grown older. When I joined, I think this program had just started. And for me to still be here 8 years later and I still see some familiar faces, I must say we are resilient, honestly, truly speaking. And I know that I was not personally much involved with the URP, but I know it had its own challenges. I could hear through the corridors how difficult it was. But I think for us to be here and celebrating it, that's a success, honestly, truly speaking. And I think we should celebrate both its challenges that it brings, but also I think I'm looking forward to the lessons that we're going to learn, you know, in scaling such projects in the country. And I think that's very critical. But I think, good morning to our colleagues online. Apologies. Maybe I should just start by introducing myself for those that don't know me. My name is Faith Nkotla, and I've been with the department for almost all my life, all my career life, you know. And I joined the climate change adaptation portfolio in 2014. And I think everything was still fairly new when I started. And to be honest, we had to all learn, you know. The climate change adaptation portfolio, I must admit, Wendy, it's a very difficult portfolio to run. You guys, I think it must even be difficult for most of you because you're on the ground. You're actually doing the actual implementation. The good thing about me is I get to sit somewhere and I plan and I think, what are the best systems, you know, that we could put in place and implement? I don't get to test them, you get to test them. Whether they work or they don't work, well, you know, it's another story, you know. But I think over the years, me working with the department and me being able to work across different spheres of government with different people, working with NGOs, working with, I don't know, you'd be amazed at some of the people that we work with, but I think I've learned a lot. And what I'm going to present today is years and years and years of hard work that we've put together as a team. We're a very small team, you know, I think we are only 5. And we run the adaptation portfolio nationwide. But I think we managed to shape up what you call climate change adaptation in the country. I want to say we've done wonderful work. Not to say I'm praising myself, but I think such a small team trying to map out and define the climate change adaptation portfolio in the country, it has been a difficult process even for ourselves at the national level. So what happened is like I said, I joined in 2014, but there was not much on the ground. You know, there was nothing that has been done, but we managed to take a concept document, let me put it that way, and developed it into a fully fledged program today. You know, that is a very good old machine. You know, I'll talk about some of the work that we've done in the country. But I think one thing that I was asked to do, you'd realize that on the program, it's Mr. Tloramaru. I'm not Mr. Tloramaru, that's our chief director. But I had to prepare this yesterday because my advisor, they insisted that you need to with other multilateral parties or with other international countries or potential donors to attract such funding. So it's very important and critical that the national government provides that beautiful landscape to ensure that we attract investments or donor funding into the country. But unfortunately, with all the issues that we've been experiencing in the country, that is slowing down. That's the reality, you know. We're no longer getting as much funding as we used to get, obviously of other reasons that I would not mention in this platform. But I think it's the duty of our national government to make sure that there is that type of funding. It's also the duty of our national government to ensure that there is allocation of resources in the country to ensure that there is good implementation of these projects and programs on the ground. But then I think another layer that I would want to also address is the importance and the role of our subnational government and the sector, our sector departments. That's very critical. Remember, the climate change is very cross-cutting and we cannot do it alone. So sector's role is very critical in the space where our sectors need to be aware of the climate risks that are out there and the potential adaptation options that need to be implemented at a sectoral level. But that is also inclusive of our provincial government. I know sometimes people will be saying, do we actually even need provinces? Yes, we do, you know, because for us as the national government, they are there to ensure that our national mandates gets to be cascaded and they get to be implemented at a subnational level. And that's very critical for us. But I think, Mandy, you mentioned something about adaptation needs to be led at a local level. And that's true. I think for me, and even us as the national government, you'll see when I present the other in other slides in terms of the policies that we put in place, how we emphasize on the criticalness or the importance of local government being there and being aware of what are the climate change risks. And we also making sure that we invest in climate responses at a local level. We've done a lot of work to ensure that we work with our local municipalities as the national department. It might have not been on the implementation level. We've tried to do it at an implementation level very recently, and we failed dismally. I'll share that. And I think later on in the day, my colleague, Mr. Jonathan Ramaya, who runs one of the implementation programs in the national department, will also share lessons learned, Mandy, you know, in terms of how we failed. We didn't fail. Let me not say we didn't fail. How challenging it was. Let me put it that way. But yeah, so maybe just a quick one. I'm going to run quickly through the other slides. What is it that we have done? I've spoken about a bit of who are the key role players and so forth. And that is not limited. You know, what I've presented, it's broader. I mean, at a local government level, that's where you'd even unpack further who are the key people that you need, the partnerships that you'd form with your universities. Like today we have UKZN that has been a key partner in the implementation of this project and so forth. So there are role players. It's just that I had to just present that at the back of my mind in terms of who are the critical role players. But of course, everyone in this room is important in terms of making sure that we promote this integrative approach of implementing adaptation projects and programs. So at a national level, how do we approach this animal? Like I said, we're a very small team. So how we are structured is we are structured in 4 categories. You have your policy and planning category. You have your research category, you have your implementation, and you have your international. This is where the international now will start talking about the work that we do with other multilateral agreements and so forth, the adaptation work, the GCF work and so forth. But under policy and implementation, you all know that in the country, we don't have a legislation. Climate change is not legislated. But I said to you, it's very important that national government provides the policy landscape that will ensure that we thrive in the implementation of our climate change response as a country. And one of the things that we've done is that we've developed what we call the NCCRP. Some of you might have came across it numerous times, or you might have referenced it so many times and so forth. The National Climate Change Response Policy, it was approved in 2011. And I think a lot of work, but commenced in 2014 to date. And the policy has been more like a guiding document in terms of how do we respond to the impacts of climate change as a country, you know. And I must say, for it just being a policy document and the influence that it has had in terms of shaping up the adaptation landscape in the country, not just the adaptation landscape, of course, there's the mitigation component, but because today we're talking about adaptation, the influence that the policy as itself had in terms of shaping up the adaptation portfolio in the country, I'm very impressed, because remember, a policy is just a voluntary document that you would just say, you know what, it guides me in terms of how do we need to respond as a country. But there has been so much uptake in terms of the implementation of the policy across the country and so forth. But I think what was also critical was the development of what we call the NES, the National Adaptation Strategy. Some of you might have been part of the development process and so forth. What the NES did was, and it's very funny because the NES came after we've actually done a lot of implementation on the ground. So it was more of packaging the lessons learned and so forth. So what the NES does is it's a strategic document that provides a guidance also in terms of the potential interventions that could be implemented in the country across different sectors or across different spheres of government and so forth, and the partnerships that you need to form as a country to ensure that you successfully implement climate change adaptation objectives in the country. And then there's also the National Development Plan. I think previously, before even the NCCRP could come into effect, we always referred to climate change objectives as in line with what are the objectives in the NDP and so forth. And now we have, the nice thing about it is that we're now moving into a process where now we're moving into legislation, the draft climate change bill. Some of you, KZN, we've done KZN a while, last month or so. Some of you would have been part of the consultation process where we're now saying, you know what, it's high time that we start taking climate change seriously as a country. We legislate it. It becomes a mandated function. Because previously it was just a voluntary thing where people would just say, okay, fine, well, maybe we need to address climate change impacts and be guided by the NCCRP. But now, different stakeholders or different sectors or different spheres of government are required to now start implementing climate change options in the country. So I will talk about it a bit later on. But then in terms of the research, it's very critical. And I think we kept on talking about evidence-based, evidence science-based policy making or interface and so forth, even at the gala. And I liked what the CEO said, the SNB CEO, to say, it's no longer about, what do we call it, science policy interface. There's the people, there's the whatever and whatever, and it just shows you how we've evolved also. So even at a national level, we promote that, we support that, and it's very important because in the climate change space, there's no way you would be able to respond to impacts of climate change without you understanding what the science is saying. You really need to be informed by the science. So there's so much partnerships that we've formed with our research society, and we even developed a research agenda for the country where we actually even work with the researchers to make sure that whatever it is that we put in place on the ground is informed by the research. There's also work that we've been working with under the CSIR in terms of the Green Book, the climate scenarios and so forth. So there's a whole range of work that we're doing under the research portfolio that we want to make sure that we have relationships with our science community, and the work that we do, even the policies that we develop moving forward are informed by the science and so forth. And then when it comes to the implementation leg, we're not so much on the project, tangible projects and programs on the ground like what you've been doing with the URP, but how we've been approaching implementation at the national government is through making sure that we provide the technical support that is required, be it that it's capacity building, be it that it's development of climate risk and vulnerability assessment frameworks, or be it that it's development of climate change adaptation response plans. That's what we've been doing as the national department. So, but I think what is great over the years, we've established what we call the adaptive capacity facility. That's where we try to test what it would be like for us as the national department if we were to get potential funding and fund this type of projects on the ground. And yeah, my colleague, Mr. Tabang and Mr. Ramaya are the right people to talk about that type of a facility. But I must say, for us, it was a very critical thing to do because we are all known about planning, but we don't ever get to the point where we now say we're implementing those strategies and plans that we've put in place on the ground. And the ACF was mainly established to do that, to test it. And of course, I mean, there's also the work that we've been doing in terms of supporting the URP and so forth, and even the small crowd, the SGFs and so forth. But I think this was very critical for us to do that. But also what's important is the work that we've been doing under the provincial and the local support program. Those programs, I think when we're talking about integrative approach, like what we're talking about today, that program has been the driver. Because those are programs that we've created with our provinces. We've co-created it with our local government municipalities, where we would sit with our local government municipalities and we will do a situational analysis. And out of that situational analysis, we will then map out what this program would look like. And that's why I think initially when we started, the main objective of those program was mainly around capacity building. And I must say that I think we tried. For those that did come across us over the years, we did provide capacity building to all the municipalities in the country, including the district municipalities. And out of those capacity building, the capacity building was mainly around climate change. You'd be amazed when we started how much our people did not know about climate change, let alone climate change adaptation. And the capacity building element was very critical. Today, you go to our municipalities, we've got climate change champions. You've got someone that could talk about climate change adaptation. You know, I was very impressed. I think 2 weeks back, we got an email from one of our provinces where they were saying to us, you know, we've been looking at our strategy and we see that there's gaps in our strategy and critical things are missing from that. And I mean, you can only do that through building capacity, through making sure that people understand and are aware of what are the climate risks and what are the potential responses that they could put in place in their respective spaces. And for us, I think we were very happy that they actually been taking the initiative to review these strategies, to implement the strategies on their own. And I think I must say, that's when you see the fruits of our labor in terms of such programs and so forth. And then, of course, there's the international league, the corps and the whatnot. I'm not into that. Don't ask me much. I don't know much what happens within the international space. It's got its own people, but there's work that we do also to support the international league. And one of them is us being partners in such projects like the URPs, the GCF and so forth, the Adaptation Fund and so forth. But also, I think we're also responsible for engaging with the global, or maybe the global donors, you know, to say that, look, this is the programs that we have in the country. This is what we've mapped out thus far. If you want to invest, please come and look at this and invest in these areas and so forth. So in a nutshell, that's the portfolio, how it's structured at a national government, and that's the approach that we're using. Maybe just quickly, I would look at how the policies that we've put in place supports what we're talking about today, integrated planning and design of adaptation projects. This is a snapshot of what the National Climate Change Response Policy looks like. So the NCCRP, like I said, it was just a guiding document that was there to guide us and outline objectives of how we as a country would like to transition to a low carbon society, and how we would like to build climate resilience and so forth in the country. And I said it addresses both mitigation and adaptation. But what I want to dwell much on in terms of the NCCRP, the policy, is that if you look at the strategic approach within the NCCRP, there are very key critical elements that the policy is addressing in terms of making sure that as and when we respond to the impacts of climate change, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that the responses that we're developing are as integrated as possible. That's very critical. They are transformational, they are developmental, they are participatory. And I think, Mandy, you've mentioned that, you've spoken about it earlier on, to say you cannot devise climate change responses or projects alone. You know, you need to make sure that everyone is involved across. And I think what's also critical is that those decisions or those responses, as and when you're developing them, they must be evident, they must be informed by the evidence on the ground. And this is where our research or our academia people are very critical in this space. And I think that's what I like about the NCCRP. It outlines the approach that you need to embark on. You know, you cannot just do it out of your head and you start saying, you know what, I'm gonna go and implement one. There's a way of how you need to do it. And I must say it's very much aligned to those principles that you spoke about earlier on, Mindy, and that's what's critical. So yeah, okay. Anyway, actually, I should skip this slide, but this is just in a nutshell the policy landscape in the country. Like we have the NCCRP, we have the draft climate change bill, and then we have the NDP. Like I said previously, I think the NDP was the key driver in terms of us formulating the climate change agenda in the country. And yeah, okay, then the climate change bill also, I think I did mention about the strategic approach in the NCCRP, but the current bill that we're currently busy with, it also clearly outlines the expectations that are expected from all role players. But I think I only pulled out this clause because I thought, you know, I remember we said climate change adaptation responses are implemented at a local level. And I thought maybe it would be ideal for me just to pull out this slide, just to highlight what the bill is saying and what are the expectations from a local government perspective. And one of the critical things is the fact that, and I want to look at the last bullet, I know the other ones are very important, that once the bill is in place, we need to make sure that we have climate change response implementation plan. And within your implementation plan, of course, you'll have projects and programs that you would have identified, and that needs to be done within 2 years. Once the bill is enacted or once the bill becomes an act, So, but I think what's important is the last bullet where it says that once the bill is enacted, we are required to make sure that response plans are integrated into relevant environmental implementation plans. And it's not just environmental implementation plans. I think your SDFs, your IDP, your SDBs, your IDPs, and so forth and so forth. So that's the critical component. So already you can see that integration is very critical throughout. And why are we emphasizing on the local government being the key role players in terms of ensuring the integrated approach? I think the reality is that that's where our vulnerable communities are. That's where most of the impacts are going to be felt. But I think what's also important is that municipalities have an important control and influence over a number of things, over a number of like building codes, transport, so that's where service delivery is happening. And that's where we need to make sure that integration of climate risk or climate hazards and so forth are mainstreamed. And that's very important. So yeah, colleagues, I thought maybe, oh, no, this is the local government support program, and I've already spoken about it in detail to say as a country, we've done risk and vulnerability in all 44 district municipalities. We've done capacity building. We've developed toolkits and so forth to make sure that we capacitate our municipalities, and we've identified climate champions, be it from a political point of view or an administrative point of view, we've done that. But I think that also another critical component is the climate finance training. We've been working with our municipalities where we train them or we capacitate them on how to package climate change adaptation project proposals that they could be able to submit to access potential funding to fund those programs. And the good thing is that already there are lessons learned that have been learned, and we've got champions such as Mendy and the others that could also be able to work with those municipalities and hold their hands as and when they manage to get this funding and so forth. So there's been lessons learned that we also have learned throughout the implementation of various projects, particularly donor-funded projects, that we would also be able to take them through and use them as a guide to implement these projects with our municipalities and so forth. So that's something that we've done so far. I think we've only done 4 provinces. For this financial year, we're going to be doing 2 more projects. Then there's this beautiful one. Remember I said to you, I think, was it 3 years ago? 3 years ago, we established what we call the Adaptation facility. The Active Capacity Facility. It's a donor-funded program. We got money from the Belgians to start testing the work that we've been planning. Like I said, over the years, we've just been providing technical support in terms of capacity building, development of response strategies, and so forth. So what we then did is we co-created this project with our municipalities. In the beginning, what we did is we mainly used the work that we did as a department in terms of remember I said we did risk and vulnerabilities for 44 district municipalities. So we used those VAs to map out who are the critical municipalities that would work with, and then we used those as part of our selection criteria, and we selected about 10, and out of the 10 we ended up with the ones that you see here on the screen. I must say in the 3 to 4 years that we've been busy with this project, it has had its serious challenges. And yeah, we will share them with you if there's a need for us to share with you. But I think what's successful is that we managed to see and test how good our policies that we put in place, how some of them can hamper implementation, and how some of them are good in terms of enhancing our objectives, in terms of our meeting our vision as a country to build a climate resilient society and so forth. But these programs, we've implemented them in those 3 district municipalities, Amatola, Garden Route, and uMngeni, particularly looking at those interventions in the bottom for each. For example, for Amatola, there's the awareness and education, removal of alien invasive species. For Garden Route, there's early detection cameras and so forth. Honestly, truly speaking, out of them, I think Amatola is the only one that is advanced, where we've seen some actual implementation. And also because of certain challenges, I might touch base on some of those challenges that we've highlighted earlier. I might touch base on some of the challenges that I'm talking about in here. And then you've got uMngeni also, that not much has also been done in that district municipality. And that is 3 to 4 years down the line in terms of and the project only had like 5 years of implementation. But look, nonetheless, I must say, we've learned a lot out of it with its challenges and so forth. We've learned a lot out of it. And what are some of those challenges? I think number one is, in government, coordination and coherence is our biggest enemy. And it will be the end of us, let me tell you, because often, when you say the word coordination, it sounds easy, but when you actually have to do it, coordination is not easy, because in this country, you don't have clear mandates. You don't have clear functions and roles. You know that you're a local government, but what is it that is expected of you to ensure the successful implementation of certain things? You don't understand it. Sometimes you would want to implement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'd say, no, but then it's not our mandated function. It sits with the regional office, or it sits with the national office and so forth. And I must say, a lot of things, they fail because of that, and also access to support. And it's not just financial support. I know we always talk about financial support, but sometimes, certain things don't need the financial muscles. They just need people to be there. Now with the coalition governments that we have, trust me, a lot of projects and programs are not moving in this country. It's sad. It's very sad. You get donors that would want to pull out and take money away, but we need that money, to ensure that we respond on the ground. But because of our political system or our administrative system is just not working, often it hampers the implementation of our projects and programs. The human resources is very critical. You'd go to certain municipalities on the ground, you want to implement a project, say we don't have anyone. Or sometimes, often, even if they have someone, they don't have the know-how. They don't have the knowledge, and I think those have been things that, and we know these things, that's the sad thing. Over the years, we know these things. And my question has always been, at what point do we start addressing them? Because I think 10 years down the line, we cannot still be talking about a municipality not having a capacity to implement. We cannot be talking about not having finance to implement certain projects and programs. I think we need to start moving beyond that, but yeah, who am I? So yeah, I think let me just leave it there. Thank you so much for indulging me. I hope I was within time. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, let's get dangerous. Okay. Morning again, everyone. So I'm going to present on scaling climate change adaptation solutions as a build up to Mike's presentation, where you come in and really get into the details of how we are particularly going to be scaling the work that has been done in the URP. But I thought that from the questions that I've had and the discussions, I realized that many of us are working on different projects, and the conversation of scaling is something that we need to just have broadly, say, how do we scale projects and what are the different approaches to scaling? Okay, so we are going to be talking about scaling, and basically you've got different types of scaling that you've got in the space. So you've got stage gating, that is what we usually use, most people, and that is just an entry level kind of approach where you've got your technology and you basically move it through a very linear process from a pilot up to scale. And it fits particular contexts, especially if you are working in a very localized context. So for small community-based projects, usually stage gating comes in and works in that space. And then you've got scaling scanning. I've seen that the colleagues like in the Lungi and Pearl in E4WS, you kind of adapt this scaling scan because you've got a very sort of consultative approach. You involve people in the process. So you co-create and you move it from that perspective, from a very localized scale up until you get sort of to a catchment, and then you try to get it into the national space. So that's like a scanning sort of approach. And then you've got what we do in the research space, which is your innovation diffusion. So that usually just involves us as researchers coming up with an idea. We have it, we say it is fantastic, and then we want to move it from innovation to diffusion, which is massification generally. So around this space, you hear people talking about massification, or if you are in government in South Africa, you hear people talking about commercialization, like we need to commercialize. That is one approach. You've got scaling readiness. Scaling readiness is mostly applicable to projects like the URP. And we've also adopted a bit of scaling readiness in the conceptualization of the GCF. If you got into the concept note of the GCF, we actually talk about how we are going to scale aspects of the GCF. So it means in the design of the project, we have ensured that we are ready to scale those things right from the beginning. So that is scaling readiness. It does not mean it will be scaled. It just means it is ready and can be scaled. The scaling is another conversation altogether to be had. And then we've got adaptive scaling, my favorite, usually because I'm not great at planning. So I'm in the business of winging it. So they came up with this so that we actually professionalize winging it. So adaptive scaling, okay. So now all of those people who have been accused of winging it and not having a plan, that's your answer. So in the URP, we've talked a lot about adaptive management. And yesterday I was presenting about how we have taken some innovations, which were niche innovations, sort of for example, the underutilized crops, that's a niche thing that we were doing, but we were able to accelerate it and we were able to expand the reach of something that was niche and happening in one particular area. And that process is very transformative. As you heard the ladies talking during the gala dinner, in terms of how it has transformed their lives, how what was just a crop or crops that they just used to have and they did not see value in them have been transformed to become valuable crops, income generating crops. We gave examples of some other crops that people would have not considered as critical to their well-being and how they've been transformed into essential sort of crops. We gave examples of how we repositioned looking at forests and change the perspective to foraging and food, to say forests are not just trees, they are sources of food and livelihoods and so forth. So they're transformative aspects, but it is highly adaptive because at any given time, you are having a lot of conversations with people in different sectors, across sectors. So in this approach also comes into, the transdisciplinarity, as people like to say, or the science, policy, practice, implementation. And just means you've got a whole lot of different actors who are coming together. So, but the important thing is that all of these are valid. Remember, I think it was yesterday, and I said, what if everyone is right? So in this case, everyone here is right. So there is no best approach. There's no need to say we are doing the adaptive scaling, that's the gold standard. What we've done in the GCF conceptualization is scaling readiness. In the URP, we've done a lot of adaptive scaling because we've had to think on the go and adapt things and blow them up. We've also done innovation diffusion in that same space because we brought in ideas that we've then taken through that space within that same cycle. So everyone in this spectrum is correct. The importance is what we call relevance of context. So we work at different scales, we work with different solutions, we work with different actors, and the challenges that we are addressing will vary, and the resources and the means that we have will also vary. So any one of these can be correct. The important thing is having a good understanding of the context. Okay. So the key elements for innovation and scaling. Innovation and scaling, we can call it research for development, or we can call it translation. So there are different ways of looking at it, but it's basically where we are taking evidence and putting it into practice and using it to inform decisions as we go. So there needs to be innovation. And this is where the partnerships come in. We've celebrated a lot in the URP, how the partnership worked. This is what the university brought in, the innovation, the science. So that was our contribution in this partnership. You need a strong understanding of context. Okay, you cannot innovate outside of the boundaries of context. It becomes irrelevant. Okay, the solution that no one needs. And the municipality brought in the context to say, these are the issues within our boundaries that need to be addressed. And they need to be addressed in this particular order. If you recall, I was not in here when Mandy presented, so I'm not sure. But when the URP was being conceptualized, agriculture was not there. In the first concept note that Riaz wrote, agriculture was not there. But it is something that emerged as we got to understand the context better. And we're like, this is a thing. that needs to be addressed, and it came in. And it also came through because of stakeholder consultations. The more we sat around the table, the more people we involved in the conversations, the more it emerged that in all of these areas, there might be many other things, but the issue of agriculture is still there and it needs to be addressed. And it came into the project, it became successful. That is adaptive part of it, and we've been able to scale it. So that is how, innovation and context in partnership with stakeholder consultation can inform your choice of technologies and what to practice. That's what we're doing in the uMngeni Resilience Project. This diagram is neater than how it actually is in real life. You need resources to do all of this, because to innovate and to convene stakeholders, just to have a meeting, us getting here together and gathering, it calls for money. Okay. SANBI as the NIE and DFFE as the designated authority brought in the resources, which unlocked this space. It also allowed, UKZN had always been here, the UMDM had always been here, but no one had convened us to come together to address a common set of challenges within the area that we actually live in. Okay, so, but those resources created that space. Those resources allowed us a week where we drove around the district, all of us together, looking at the landscape together and understanding the challenges that we face in the district together. So resources are key. So when we talk about accessing climate finance and all of those things, it is critical because it brings about the power to really convene and actualize potential that might be there, but not being realized otherwise. Responsibility and accountability. So for all of these things to actually gel together, there has to be responsibility and accountability as well as oversight. So we've got the DFFE providing oversight. We've got SANBI as the NIE providing a framework for responsibility and accountability. And you've got the UMDM and UKZN being accountable partners in this framework. So all of these things are happening in real time. That's the messy part that I'm saying, that this diagram is neater than the realities of it. When they happen, they are not compartmentalized. It's happening in real time. You're implementing something, you're standing in the field, you're thinking what you want to do, but at the same time, you just don't get to do whatever you want to do. There has to be some accountability to say, why were you doing this? What was the climate rationale? The climate rationale is coming from that context. Okay, is what you are proposing to do, is it relevant? Is it good value for money? It's coming from the innovation space. Because after you've done all of that, you still have to go and convince the resources to unlock so that you can implement. So it's all happening in the same space. And that's how it was happening in the URP. It takes a lot of back and forth conversations, a lot of haggling. In the beginning, Mike used to come here, I think almost every month or so, and would literally bash heads, like literally. There would be times when no one would like the next person. Yeah, because of, he would have to exercise the oversight role. And I would argue and say, but, I'm here, I'm informed by context, I've got the solutions, and I've convened the stakeholders, and this is needed. Now, give me the money and, get out of my way. Unfortunately, he never got out of my way. And then you take it into the scaling space. So the same thing basically applies within the adaptive scaling. But adaptive scaling, personally, I like it because it brings in more dimensions. So you now have, if we were talking from yesterday, we now have the household aspect. So we're taking it down to the unit, the elementary unit, which is what we did in the URP. We understood the socio-economic environment. That's the context that I was talking about at the beginning. We understood the policy environment. Thanks very much to the DFFE. Through the URP, we got to participate in like the NAS, the NFCS, even the drafting of the climate change bill. So we participated in a lot of policy processes, which were then able to bring back into how we were implementing the URP, so that there would be alignment. We would not be doing, something parallel outside of the framework. So there was an understanding of the policy environment. There was a strong understanding of the natural environment. Sanbi always insisted and reminded us that despite all that was happening, Sanbi has a particular mandate that must be visible in whatever they are doing, and they need to show it. And we also partnered a lot with INR, DACT, Ground Truth, and all of these other people who have a strong understanding of the natural environment. We brought in our understanding where it mattered, and all of these were coming in to this space and informing decisions that we were making constantly. So again, I have to emphasize that these are things that happen in real time. So all of those things need to be brought to bear in the moment as decisions are being made. And that's how we were adapting and moving forward in the URP. And again, the emphasis on a diverse range of stakeholders. I must say that I understand why in many projects people shy away from diverse stakeholders and often opt to go it alone or with fewer actors. If you have fewer actors, it makes the decision-making process simpler. Consensus is easier to reach. If you have a bigger group of people, it makes decision-making harder because it is more difficult to find consensus. Because when you've got a bigger group, you now have issues of different agendas. Sometimes the agendas compete. So how to find consensus in that space becomes challenging. It calls for a very different skill set that none of us is equipped with when we come out of school or university and so forth. So it requires a lot of experience that you have acquired from dealing with the different actors and the ability to reconcile what might seem as competing agendas or divergent agendas and articulate a vision that is inclusive, where then everyone, despite their agenda, can locate themselves and you can get them to rally around that vision. So that is very difficult to do in practice. And it requires what I call active listening, where at any given time, you have to be really paying attention to what the room is saying so that you pick out those things. Some agendas are not explicitly written. So you have to be listening to get what those agendas are. And what I like about this is it's not technocratic. So it challenged people like myself when we came into the URP, because I'm what would ordinarily be referred to as a technocrat. I'm coming from a science and innovation perspective. Normally I would employ, the stage gating or the innovation diffusion kind of pathways. So because we've got our solution, we've tested, and we believe strongly in it that this is the way, and there can be no other way. Like whoever is not here is lost. So it was quite challenging, for us from the university sector, also getting into this space. But it is very productive because the successes in the URP that we have been celebrating these last couple of days basically come out of this process of being adaptive, having that adaptive management, the multiple dimensions that we're able to engage in real time, and how it informed the choice of interventions that was then implemented. So just to emphasize again around what I was saying on the aspect of adaptive scaling, it has to be responsive. And again, that is where that understanding of context and so forth comes in. Because once you understand the context, you learn that the challenges you're dealing with are complex. They're not located in one sphere, they are multidimensional. And therefore you need a more systematic approach to how you deal with them. And climate change is multidimensional. You are not just dealing with one thing. For example, we had floods and so forth. When you are dealing with floods, you're not just dealing with a water issue, it becomes a human issue because of infrastructure, people being displaced. It becomes a socio-economic issue because of people losing their livelihoods. It becomes a health issue in many places because if you've got water sitting around being idle for prolonged periods of time, there's a risk to waterborne diseases. So it escalates to a health issue. It is an environmental issue. So you can't just say we are bringing the water people or we are bringing the infrastructure, the engineers. It requires almost everyone to just come and address one issue. So it requires systematic approaches. It has to be inclusive. And inclusion, I must emphasize, in scope, process, and effort. Not inclusion in calling you to the Indaba, okay? That this does not count as inclusion. Inclusion is when we sat down with many people, when we were still developing the URP, when we were prioritizing the words, why Swaimani, why Vulindlela, why Nklazuka, when we were discussing the range of interventions to be done, when we then sat in a hut with 15 ladies in Swaimani to say, okay, we have money now, what are we going to do with that money? That's inclusion. So you include people in the scope, you include them in the process, and then you include them in the effort. Okay, so those are the fancy terms that we now like to throw around as, co-understanding, co-creation, co-design, and co-implementation. They need to be done in practice. It needs to be reflective. Last time I spoke about reflexivity. So you need to have the ability to reflect on the functionality of scaling and whether you're being responsive and inclusive, again, in real time. So we used to have like reflection workshops of our own, Lungi knows this, where we would just sit down as a project team to reflect on these things, to say, let's be self-critical. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Do we need to do things differently? And so forth. So you need to build in reflexivity in that. And above all, you need to be flexible. Okay. We celebrated, I always like it when people go to Squamish and they look at the lightning warning system. It's not written anywhere in the project. Nowhere, never was part of the plan. But again, flexibility, because as we implemented, it came up that there's this other problem here. There's the issue of lightning. What do we do? How do we manage it? Okay. And we came up with a solution. We had the context. We had done the stakeholder consultation. We went to Sanbi to unlock the resources because it was not in the budget. Fortunately, the rand fell. Unfortunately, fortunately. But for us, it was fortunate because then there was some extra money in the budget, which we're then able to reallocate and say, okay, let's buy a lightning warning system. But that's flexibility. A lot of times people get rigid in projects and they're like, no, it's not part of the program. It's not in the results framework. You go to the funder will remind you to focus on what you have been contracted to do. Don't get distracted, 1, 2, 3, 4, get those to me quickly. We are not going to talk about anything else until you've given me these 4 items. So the flexibility, helped really in terms of our adaptive approaches. So for example, I'll give an example of operationalizing and adapting, solar irrigation. I'm not sure if you saw the solar irrigation pilot or you ended at the one garden. We've implemented a solar irrigation pilot in Skwaimani. Again, it did not include irrigation as one of the interventions. The interventions were mostly from a crop-based perspective and so forth. But in implementing and discussing with the communities, we realized that access to water and being able to irrigate, especially for the vegetable gardens, was critical. For the field crops, rain-fed production was ideal, and we just needed to implement, soil water conservation kind of practices and so forth. But for the vegetables and for them to be able to produce all year round, they needed to be access to water and irrigation. But they're in a rural area and access to electricity is a problem. So if you are going to irrigate, you need an energy source to, lift or pump and distribute the water. So we thought of solar irrigation in that particular effort. And we went ahead and, we installed what I thought was a very lovely, installation. Lessons to be learned from that, though, is now with load shedding happening, solar panels are under risk. I'm telling you, when we did the design of the system, security was not an issue. There was no one interested in solar panels. But over the last year, we've experienced, theft of the solar panels. We've had to be innovative in terms of how do we secure these panels so that they remain there and they remain active. Because now they're actually a resource, they're in demand because of what is happening all around us. But that's part of, thinking and moving ahead. So again, with the solar irrigation, we took an approach again to understand, to analyze together with the farmers, as I was saying, what is the opportunity space. We did some hydrogeological surveys. Is there water in the area? Can we dig a borehole? Can we pump from the rivers or the natural springs? And, what is the market space like? And all of these things, we were doing them with farmers. That is where UKZN and everyone comes in, those regular farmer engagements. There was some, co-development with private sector. We set a lot with Sherwood pumps. They are not here with Rob Poto. They are not here because at that time, solar-based irrigation was not, and probably still is not, a very popular or common thing happening in the rural areas. So we had to have a lot of conversations with them about what we wanted to do, but they were open. So again, having these public-private relationships is very instrumental, because a lot of the advice that they gave us was not built. It was just engaging and conversations that we had. They only billed us for the supply and installing, but a lot of the technical input was not charged and so forth. So the private sector partnerships are important for scaling. In the URP, this is a weakness that we had in the URP, that we did not focus a lot from inception on private sector participation. It was more just public, community, and so forth. But for sustainability, these private partnerships really matter. We see it now, like for the fire early warning system, where we had the Richmond FPA coming on board and so forth as a public-private partnership. That was the only private-public partnership that we really worked on. But my thinking, Mandy and everyone else, is as we move into the GCF, we should really have a more clear and focused thinking around how we unlock private sector participation, because it is really important for scaling a lot of these things. So we need to bring them on board. We need to target investment. So some of these things, because we're working on a smaller scale in Skwaimani, we were able to do them as the university in terms of, solar suitability mapping, to see whether it is feasible to do solar in those spaces, looking at the market segmentation and so forth. But these are things that if we bring in the private sector, they would be able to do these things at a national or provincial level and really help scale out these solutions that we have piloted. We are now looking at scaling through the GCF and other climate finance. So this is something we've embedded into the GCF, and we hope to scale it through that. Again, the resource bit that I mentioned earlier. You need to respond to demand-driven capacity building. We did have a component on capacity building in the URP, component 4. It worked very well, but I think going forward, we actually need to allocate more resources towards capacity building at multiple levels. So it's not just building the capacity of farmers in the rural areas, it's also about building the capacity of officials in government so that they are sensitized to this space, they are able to bring in that knowledge into their everyday work and inform decisions as they are making them. We need to also capacitate students. I remember when it was the Indaba in, where was it, Pearl? The one where we went to the Drakensberg. Was it no, the one where we were staying in the Drakensberg. Didima, yes. And there was a field visit where people went to this place where there was a dam and so forth, and people were complaining about water. And one of the government officials, looked pointedly at me. Unfortunately, in that minute, I looked like the university. And said, the students you are training, the engineers you are giving us are not fit for purpose. They can't do anything. So when they come here and they come to these places, they cannot design anything that is useful to the farmers. So that is why things are not moving here. So we've got engineers, but they can't. So we need a new and different type of capacity that is able to respond to these challenges that we are facing. So again, when we think of capacity development, we need to think at that level also. And that is part of scaling and making sure that these things are sustainable in the long term. Because if we don't have the right sort of skills coming through the system, occupying positions in areas, we'll make investments here and there, but the people we hand them over to will not have the capacity to manage them or take them forward. So we need to think more broadly in terms of how we build capacity. In the case of solar, we also had to spend time in understanding the system that we were trying to implement and pilot, and thinking of how we are going to scale it into the GCF Fortunately, we had the experience of having worked in Limpopo, at least through the SGF, and seeing where most of the farmers are located, the challenges with their gardens, they all wanted to irrigate. How do we manage that? I remember we visited one garden back then for the small grants facility where they were not operational. They had everything, but they said they couldn't afford ESCOM. That was their request to say, can someone talk to ESCOM and get them to, but it's not sustainable. Even if someone was to go and talk to ESCOM to write off their debt, ESCOM would not put a waiver to say you shall not pay for life. They might just clear your debt now, but you start again accumulating new bills. So we thought of it in that context and understanding it and so forth. And we got a lot of lessons from colleagues in India, South Asia, where I'd visited with Lungi and some members of our team for another visit on early warning systems. And we saw them doing this thing and said, okay, we're trying to do this thing in South Africa. What are the pitfalls? Where have you failed? What are the lessons? And they gave us a lot of lessons, which we are now able to implement here locally, and we're able to scale these things. Okay, co-identifying partnerships. I want to bring it close to an end. I realize I'm taking a lot of time. Okay, this is where I want to come now. You get the slides. Yeah. So this one really excites me. Okay, because we've piloted solar in Swaimani. We use the resources to, install a system that is bigger than the need that was there. So the capacity of the system that we installed, even the capacity of the borehole that we drilled, can actually supply water to that particular ward. So the system has more capacity than the 2 small gardens that it is irrigating. And there are things that we could not implement here, but we've put in place, we are building a pack house in Swaimani. But we took this concept now and, we had some conversations with the DSI, Department of Science and Innovation, and the CSIR, and they said, we've got this thing called Convergence of Technologies Platform, CTP. So we said, we've got some technologies that we've piloted in the uMngeni Resilience Project that we think can converge and actually speak to something bigger. So they allowed us to develop. So this is now what we are working towards in terms of getting those things to converge. So we've got the solar that I was talking about and how to scale that solar. We've got the pack house that we've got going on and we've erected. We've got the water source sorted out. Someone was asking me about livestock and so forth. Mandy, you remember my crazy idea about biogas digesters? We brought them back in. Yeah, I'm a bit stubborn. But essentially, these are things that now we are able to scale them at this level, but they were piloted in the URP at some level to give us the evidence to then be able to say, we can integrate these things for more impact. So we are now moving into what we call an agri-photovoltaic system. So we are going to link that solar system to the pack house, and we are going to create or install a biogas digester next to the pack house to address the issue of waste that is generated by the pack house and also by livestock in the area. but use that to generate also a source of energy that will drive that pack house, and also provides fertilizer in terms of how we deal with, the waste or the byproducts from the biogas digester. We'll take that back into the garden, the community vegetable garden. And then, of course, we talked about the issues of market and shortening the distance between people and the market. So this is just an example of how, through an adaptive scaling approach, we have taken interventions that have been piloted in the uMngeni Resilience Project and are scaling them at different levels. So this is a scale up that is just moving to a district level in terms of creating an agri-hub that we have. We're supposed to, well, I will not make the trip, but we have a delegation that is going to India on the 11th to the 13th of May. Again, the DSI has partnered with us through a bilateral agreement between South Africa and India, funded by the FCDO, Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. So we are bringing an Indian industrial delegation to South Africa to invest in scaling this to other districts in the province. So again, these are things that were piloted in the uMngeni Resilience Project, but are now being scaled. And again, I emphasize that it's, that readiness, that thinking, you just don't end up drawing these lines if you didn't think about them from the beginning. You have to think about it from the beginning, that how are we going to scale these? Who are the stakeholders that we need to bring on board that can support that scaling? So this is now something that's going to happen. And, we've got partners that are there, and it will be fantastic. So just to close, in terms of the recommendations that we have learned from this, is the policy space is very important, because the policy space creates an enabling environment for people like myself, for a lot of practitioners in this room, to be able to operate and do what we want to do. But there has to be a feedback mechanism into the policy space, so that, we inform the policymakers so that they continuously reflect also and come up with policies that support the sort of work that we need to do. Currently, there's a bit of a mismatch, and I'll continue to say this, between our ambition at a policy level and the situation that we have on the ground. So we need to reconcile our ambition with the realities on the ground. Our ambitions are first world, but we are pretty much third world. So we have to, pick where we want to play. Obviously, we can't play in the G7. They're not going to invite us, but we need to have policies that reflect that, and really empower people at the bottom to be able to make decisions about their environment, their resources, and so forth. We were able to do this in the URP, mostly because of where it was located and its governance structures, where we're already within that framework, where DFFE was there, we had an entity of the government, SANBI, there, we had a municipality, a district municipality that was there, and we were coming in as a technical partner. So how do we operationalize that kind of framework so that it's not just a URP thing, it becomes a national way of doing business? So this is how we do business in this sort of way. This is how we organize ourselves to deliver. So we need a delivery model. So that's a recommendation. Again, I emphasize on engaging with the private sector. Mike is going to come and share a bit also around leveraging other investments. The scale up that I was showing you now is being realized through leveraging other investments. So the URP has done its part. Now, but it has set a strong foundation for us to be able to leverage other investments and bring them into the space and realize something bigger that is going to benefit more people than the initial investment. We need knowledge brokering. Mandy does a good job of that. You talk to her about something, while she's still talking, she says, you know what, there's this other person that I should link you up with who is doing something in this space. So we need that knowledge brokering. We don't have enough knowledge brokers. We don't have enough people who can link ideas in space and time. Convening this kind of platforms is important because it also facilitates knowledge brokering. So it's important to have these sort of platforms and maintain them. We need to engage multiple stakeholders in multiple sectors. This project was implemented through the DFFE, but it required DALAD to be involved in terms of the agricultural side of it. It required COGTA to be involved because of the early warning systems component of it, which falls in their sector. It required Treasury because of oversight on finances and commitments and so forth. And as you can see, even DSI, Science and Innovation, is finding a space in there because they've got a mandate to scale innovations and transform economies and so forth. We have even worked with the Department of Small Business Development. This is something I didn't mention. We have been funded to a tune of, I think it's 15 million or something over a 3-year period through the Small Enterprise Development Authority, SEDA, to establish an agri-hub that will coordinate training, the capacity development, the things that we're doing in the URP, but bringing them into this hub. We are actually renovating a space at UKZN. Some of you who worked at UKZN will know there used to be a creche on the main campus. I own it now. We are transforming it into an agri-hub, a center for training. We're going to be bringing young people from the rural areas to train there on all of these things, all the capacity development programs that we developed through the URP. We're going to channel them into this space. And it's specifically an agri-hub for scaling underutilized and indigenous crops. And that's what it will be doing in the province. So see different actors, different sectors coming into the space, something that was initiated through the DFFE. So we need sectors coming into the space and working together. We need to integrate scaling into existing platforms. So you guys sit on a lot of platforms where we don't have access to. I hear Mike always saying NAFAB and all sorts of fancy acronyms. So we need to integrate it into those platforms so that that readiness and that thinking and the multi-stakeholder approaches are already embedded at those levels. So that's pretty much what I had. I tried to combine the theory of scaling with some examples of how we applied it and contextualized it within the uMngeni Resilience Project and how the lessons could translate to policy recommendations. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you, Tafadzwa and Tufe. Really rich information. And I think that what we can all start to see is there's a convergence of the ideas framed in different ways from different perspectives. But I think it really shows you that the URP has done a really good job of integrating right across the systems, not fixing all the problems, but integrating. So we want to make a little bit of a process change here because we think that's been quite heavy and you deserve a tea break. Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So if we can have a quick tea break, how's like 15 minutes, grab tea, come back kind of tea break? Yeah. And then when we come back, we'll hear from Mike, and then we really want to hear from you because that really is quite an important part of the session as we move towards lunchtime. Tafadzwa?
I was going to say, Christine would like us to congregate in the front and take a group photo.
In the front here?
No,
outside front.
Yeah.
Okay,
we
so
need
if,
proof of evidence.
all right, proof of evidence. All right, so just so that we're all on time in terms of online, I don't have my watch on. What time are we coming back? What? It's 35 now. So 11 is probably realistic for us to reconvene. If everyone can be back in your seats at 11 to hear from Mike and then to move into our policy engagements. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so morning, everyone. As Mandy said, this is the last, formal presentation of the whole Indaba. So thanks for sitting through this morning, and one more session, and I'll try and keep it brief. And then, as Mandy said, we can get into some more, constructive, engaging discussions to close us off. So my name's Mike Jennings. I'm from Sanby, under Mandy. I've been supporting the project for 10 years, which I guess that makes me one of the older people, as Mandy said. A little reluctant to accept that term, I'd say evolved, resilient, I said. But anyway, I joined as a consultant actually 10 years ago to help design this project. And Mandy, I think that initial contract was 6 months. And then that rolled from there into another 6 months. Tafadzwa spoke about us in the beginning. I think he said butting heads. Tafadzwa has a very hard head, but so do I, a little more accommodating, but so did I. And we found each other, and almost 10 years later, here we are. So, from there, I joined to help the municipality and UKZN design this project. This has always been their project, Sandy facilitating, overseeing. Once the project was approved, Lungi, Lindo, Tobile joined the team. So there's lots of us who have been, from the beginning. And I must say, from a Sandy perspective and a personal perspective, it's really nice. It's satisfying to be here after all this time. To talk about what went well, and there's lots that did. What didn't go so well, and of course we need to talk about those things so that we learn, we keep learning, and we take those lessons into the future. So on Wednesday, we all went to site. We got an idea of where the project is working into the receiving environment. Some of us had quite a long drive to Nkluzuka. Luckily, the bus didn't get stuck, although I was worried there for a few minutes. We got an idea of the context and some of the challenges in working into these areas, and also the need. You can see the vulnerability at play. You see the isolated nature of where people are living, and you can see the need to build resilience. Yesterday, we got into more of a technical discussion on the different components of the project, with a national perspective into the project case studies, and then some discussions following that. Today, we've been discussing some of the lessons learned, very broadly. There's lots more to say on that. Some of the emerging policy recommendations, from Tafadzwa. We heard the national context, and now we're just gonna end looking ahead to some of the ways that the project has been upscaled. We've been talking about that, the whole way through, but then just looking at one particular case study. We've heard about the Green Climate Fund a lot, so I'm just going to take you through how we got to that point briefly, and where we are, which is at the beginning. So there's plenty of time and lots of opportunity to input. So just before I get there, sorry, you can't really read the top, but we've been talking about this upscaling. I learned some new terms yesterday, and Dr. Fadzwa just confused me this morning again. Yesterday we learned about deep scaling, which I understand is piloting, and forming an evidence base, outscaling, which is replication, and then upscaling, which is where we affect policy and systemic change. And as Tafadzwa said, all of that's playing out all the time. Now we learned about what's adaptive scaling. Not make it up as you go along, but be alert and alive to the opportunities to share lessons, innovation, diffusion, all those things. So, I won't go through the list, but continually the project has it's found its tentacles in other processes and other projects, and all the lessons that have been learned have been shared along the way through those different collaborations, toolkits, dashboard, research papers. I'll just one slide, and I'll go back to this one. Ask Tafadzwa, just off the top of his head, Tafadzwa and team, to come up with a list of other projects that the project has worked into and benefited. And there was a long list. This was just this morning. You don't have to read all of this, but I think if you add up all those dollars, there's plenty of innovation and lesson sharing and influence and a multiplier effect, if you like, of where the URP is working in one place and affecting many other processes and many other projects, and adding the innovation and the adaptive angle to lots of other work. So just to go back to the previous slide, right? So we've heard Faith talk about the second last one, the adaptive capacity facility, which has learned lessons from the early warning system of this project. The one above is another project funded by the Government of Flanders, early warning system project co-led by SAWS, UKZN, and the Central University of Technology. And then the last one I want to look at today, and I'll read the whole title out, once, is the GCF project we're upscaling, or this URP is being upscaled into. So the full title would be Ecosystem-Based Approaches for Transforming Smallholder Farming Systems that are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change in South Africa. So we call that the EBA Farm project, and I'll refer to it as EBA Farm from here on. So just not to spend any time on this, but to give you a brief background. So the URP was funded by the Adaptation Fund on the left. Next project, the EBA Farm project, will be funded by the Green Climate Fund on your right. Both of these funds are accessed by accredited entities. So you can't wake up one day and say, hey, I want to ask the GCF for some money. You would have to do it through an accredited entity. And those have to be nominated by what's called the National Designated Authority, NDA. And you've heard that Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment is the NDA for both the Adaptation Fund and the GCF in South Africa. So the department nominated SANBI to be an accredited entity of the Adaptation Fund in 2011. At present, we're the only national implementing entity in South Africa. The Adaptation Fund did open up the opportunity for a second implementing entity to be nominated and seek accreditation. We haven't done that yet. And the Adaptation Fund initially made $10 million available to all eligible countries that have a national implementing entity. That 10 million was allocated to 2 projects in South Africa, the uMngeni Resilience Project at 7.5 million, and another project, the Small Grants Facility, which Tafaz was mentioned a little bit, that got the balance, the 2.5 million. There is further Adaptation Fund resources available should a second entity be accredited. Moving across to the Green Climate Fund, SANBI was accredited in 2016. We're currently one of 2 direct access entities, the other one being the Development Bank of South Africa. Very different modalities to SANBI, but importantly, SANBI is one of many accredited entities that's available to work in South Africa through GCF projects. So all the multilateral implementing entities, the UN organizations, FAO, for example, they're all able to run oversee GCF projects in South Africa. And along with that, there's in theory no country cap. So whereas Adaptation Fund, there was $10 million for South Africa, GCF doesn't have that limitation. Also, the Adaptation Fund funds adaptation projects only, whereas the GCF funds both adaptation and mitigation projects. So flowing out of SANBI's accreditation was an accreditation profile. I won't spend much because it's all background, but basically, SANBI is able to support projects that are up to $50 million, including co-financing, which is the national contribution to the project. To give you an idea of the scale of the Green Climate Fund, that $50 million is considered a small project. So up to $250 million is a medium-sized project, and anything above $250 million is a large project. So some of those, $400, $500 million single projects are mostly mitigation related. So there's not many adaptation projects at that scale. And you have to consider, things like absorptive capacity and if a country can run a project of that size. So SANBI is looking at up to $50 million. Our projects are grant-based, no loans or concessional finance or anything like that. That would be the development banks. And SANBI's projects would always have low environmental and social risks. We wouldn't ever be building dams or relocating communities or anything like that. And SANBI's projects will always focus on climate change adaptation with potential for mitigation co-benefits. And that means that SANBI would always work with vulnerable people in whatever catchment or whatever area we work in, as that's one of the headline indicators for climate change adaptation projects. Again, another background slide. Once SANBI was accredited, we went and developed a funding framework outlining the type of projects SANBI could support. And those are informed by, international policies, national policies at the top there, and what the Green Climate Fund allows. And then from SANBI's side, our mandates, our experiences, and our accreditation profile. And there's kind of a broad list of the types of projects. You'll see, things like the community angle again, transformative in nature, and the last point, importantly, include nature-based responses, including ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, talking to SANBI's mandate. So once we had this in place, the next thing was to call for projects that SANBI could support under the Green Climate Fund. So what we did is we ran, we called for expressions of interest way back, and you'll start seeing some of these timelines now and start to understand, that this does take a long time. So Towards the end of 2017, we called for ideas. We did a national roadshow supported by the department. We received over 120 ideas or expressions of interest. There was a whole process that included the department, included sector departments from the climate change working group, technical evaluators, internal and external committees. And at the end of all of that, 6 expressions of interest were selected for further development, which happened in around March 2019. So you'll see it took us over a year to get to those ideas. We didn't have to do it this way. We could have, SANBI could have just approached certain partners, certain institutions and said, we'd like you to develop a project, but we didn't want to do it that way. We wanted to be inclusive and make the opportunity open to a broader group of stakeholders. This process is very interesting to the Green Climate Fund because, as I say, they don't prescribe that it has to be done this way. They and we consider it very defendable. How did you get your projects? Well, it was this. It's all documented. It's all there. The reasons why certain projects, weren't shortlisted is available, and informed by many, many different levels and sectors. We presented this to the Green Climate Fund numerous times, and they're interested in the pros and cons, and talking about this to other countries who are thinking about how to arrive at GCF project ideas. Another slide, which you don't have to worry about the details, but this is just to show you that there were 6. The first one is our current eco disaster risk reduction project. It's the grayed out one then. And then the next one, this is the one that was proposed by the University of KwaZulu-Natal as an upscale of the URP. So just to read the title, Transforming Rural Landscapes in KZN, the Eastern Cape and Limpopo into Climate Resilient Farming Systems. And that was proposed by UKZN as an expression of interest. Those two, the top 2, were kind of considered to be ready to be written into concept notes. And there were some more that had merit in terms of their ideas and being, aligned with what the GCF and SANBI wanted to see as big projects. And the bottom one there was an expression of interest proposed by the then Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries under the Director of Plant Health. And it was around early warning systems for pests and diseases. So what we did there is we took those 2 projects and we combined them into the EBA farm project. And this is the proposed project that's an upscale of elements of the uMngeni Resilience Project. And just interesting to note that as the URP came to be in a similar way, in that Mandy spoke earlier about a similar process was followed, where SANBI called for ideas under the Adaptation Fund, and the municipality submitted an idea that didn't include climate resilient agriculture. It had the early warning system, it had the built environment, ecological infrastructure, but it didn't include climate resilient agriculture. At the same time, UKZN also proposed an idea in the same area that focused on climate resilient agriculture and ecological infrastructure. So again, we combined them together to form the URP. So we've done this before. And then this, you all know, the uMngeni Resilience Project, and what's being upscaled would be the multi-hazard early warning system, the ecological infrastructure part, the climate resilient agriculture, and the knowledge management and policy recommendations. Similar principles, but in a different format. And you'll notice the part that is not being upscaled is the climate proof settlements. So the rest is forming the basis of the EBA farm project. So to get into not too much detail on the project itself, we've given you the title. The provinces would be KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and Mpumalanga and Limpopo, because that's where largely the smallholder farmers in South Africa are located. But importantly, that's where we are at this stage. We've just got the provinces, which the GCF is happy with the rationale behind that. Where within those provinces the project is located is still to be determined, 100% in consultation with provincial departments of agriculture, local stakeholders, and the farmers themselves on the ground. The indicative project value is $25 million as a GCF grant, with co-financing to be added to that. And then the project leads are also still to be determined. We know the National Department of Agriculture will have a role. We know absolutely that the provincial departments of agriculture will have a key role to play, but the exact roles and responsibilities are still to be determined. And you'll see that's a common theme, still to be determined, because we're starting this process now. And of course, UKZN, with all the knowledge that's been built up over the URP, will play a form of a technical support role, which is still to be determined. So at a high level, the rationale for this EBA farm project, would be that South African smallholder farmers are reliant on rainfall. We know that smallholder farmers have limited access to tailored climate information. We know that climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of droughts and floods across South Africa. And we know that these changes are exacerbating vulnerabilities. This, of course, is all to be, really fleshed out and really detailed through the theory of change that all projects need and that is required by the Green Climate Fund. In terms of the very broad high-level objectives, it would be to address adaptation needs, to overcome barriers, and thereby enhance the adaptive capacity of smallholder farmers in these target catchments within the 4 provinces. And there'll be a focus on ecosystem-based approaches. Tafadza was talking about the role that ecosystems and functioning ecosystems and ecosystem services play in supporting farmers. That was in our agriculture session yesterday. And of course, the objective of the project would be to scale up these transformative agricultural approaches. Bit of a mouthful, but the 3 components would be, number 1, a multi-hazard early warning system to provide information and services to smallholder farmers to build resilience. As we heard yesterday, without information to inform decision makers, decision making, the aspect of climate smart farming is a bit lacking. So you can provide, resilient crops, but the real smart part comes in with information provided to farmers in a way that is understood and that informs decision making on their own, beyond immediate support of the project. Component 2 would be the climate resilient smallholder farming part, use of ecosystem-based approaches to transform these smallholder farming systems. And again, that's, the URP has given us a framework for what works here. That may be different in the different provinces. We've heard livestock, in certain parts of the Eastern Cape, for example, livestock is more important than crops, for example. So that framework will be tailored to what's needed. And that, again, this component 2 will differ in all the different provinces and is absolutely still to be determined in consultation with the provinces, relevant stakeholders, and the farmers themselves. And then the last part would be to upscale these transformative approaches through the development of capacity, cross-cutting capacity, and sustainably embed these approaches at all levels of government. So, we've spoken, right from the start around the need to engage at the right level, with communities. We've heard of the need to engage traditional leaders where we work, and that's all still to come. So in terms of the process that we're at right now, and again, you'll start getting an idea of the timescales involved in these Green Climate Fund driven processes. So we started writing the concept note for this work in April. There's been various submissions to the Green Climate Fund with a comments and response period, and we've submitted now. Well, we submitted 3 times in total. In October 2021, the GCF endorsed the concept note, which is really just a high-level document outlining, what the project will cover. And what they did is they invited SANBI to apply for what they call Project Preparation Facility Funding, PPF funding, which really is resources to help SANBI and the leads provinces develop a full funding proposal. Now, this is quite an undertaking, but the PPF application was submitted in August, and eventually the GCF was happy in November last year. What they then do is they advertise that opportunity to a preformed roster of international consulting consortiums. And they then choose those from that list based on applications. And SANBI was part of the selection process, and consultants to support us would support the country were selected in April and have only just been contracted now in May. So we're still working through, their work plan, and that'll be shared, which will extend from, June right through to into 2024. And we'll start fleshing out, who will be consulted and speak to all the provinces about who needs to be involved in this process. So, sometimes we present and people feel they've been left behind. That's not the case. So if you're sitting in the room going, I want to be part of this, now is the time, and over the next weeks and months is the time to get in touch with us and say, right, what is the plan? How can I be involved? We don't want to be presenting the project, or we don't want the project leads to be presenting the project at the end and you going, I wish I'd known about this earlier. We want to do this together as a partnership so we don't leave anyone behind. and that'll ultimately result in a stronger, more implementable, more impactful project. And the project will run for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, also still to be determined. Briefly, so the time scale that we're looking at submitting is, and the GCF has kind of stipulated or requested us to submit a full funding proposal by March next year. We've already heard the concerns around that. Will that be enough time for community engagement with traditional leaders, for example? And we've heard those concerns, and I think what we need to do is, we need to start. We need to work as efficiently as we can, but as slowly and as deliberately as we need to make sure that we don't miss steps. We do it properly. We don't have to go back later, because of course no one wants that. In terms of the design, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the GCF has a number of criteria. This is just kind of packaged in the same things as we've been talking through over the last few days. Impact potential, how much of an adaptation impact will it have? Paradigm shift potential, how replicable, how scalable is the project? Sustainable development potential, does it have wider benefits? Are things like environmental and social safeguards and gender equality included in the project design? The needs, does it meet the needs of the country and of farmers? Country ownership, does the country have the capacity to implement? As questions that GCF will ask, and the design will have to talk to that. And then efficiency and effectiveness, does the project foster cost effectiveness and private sector funding? So Tafadzwa mentioned it earlier, more and more we've been asked about the role of the private sector, in taking to scale and in supporting sustainability of the project. So just in closing, looking at outscaling, the URP was in one province, and the idea is for the EBA farm to take that to 4 provinces. The EBA farm project, the URP was worth 7.5 million, but 1.5 million more or less was for the climate proof investment part. So it's about $6 million worth of investment into what will be upscaled, and that will be upscaled to $25 million of grant financing. And the URP had 25,000 beneficiaries, of which more or less 1,000 are direct farmers. Is the EBA farm project aims to influence 80,000 smallholder farmers. So you can see the upscale from URP, piloting, learning, understanding, taking lessons, and now through the GCF, taking that. And I think, important in the design, we've heard the words many times before. I think someone spoke about the yesterday spoke about the L's, like transformational and all that. We like to talk about the potential for T's, scalability, replicability, and sustainability. And those are only achieved through partnerships. Again, a word we've heard many, many times today. And we've heard about the scale of the need. We've been to site, we've seen how vast the areas are. We know that donor funds will never be sufficient to meet this need. So we must be mainstreaming, these climate change adaptation principles and practices through policy into national and subnational government actions and budgets. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. So you can see a lot of the putting of the learnings into practice live. So right now, live, there's the development of this GCF project. There's a reference group. The affected provinces are on the reference group. The adaptation network should be on the reference group. If you, SAWS is on the reference group. Some of others of you in the room are on the reference group. If you think you should be and you're not, get hold of us. If you're on the reference group and you're supposed to be representing your people and you're not representing them properly, please represent them properly. Okay. And let's make this work. Okay. Because this can only work if you bring your ideas and your energy and your suggestions into the process. Okay. So we can sit here together collectively and all have these amazing reflections and experiences and collect up the lessons. But if we get the live opportunity to do something different, now's the time to jump in and do it. So this project, it's uncharted. You can see it's a framework at the moment where we work, exactly what we do, who we work with, how much money gets put to what. It's all being decided. And the consultants will write what we tell them, right? We know that, right? That's what, so if there's any consultants in the room. So we need to tell them what to write. Okay, so we want to move now to, are there any burning questions for Mike? Let me give you an opportunity for that while I call up my next slide. Mike, do you want to come up? And if you can ask the question into the mic that Terry will give you. And Mike, you can come talk here while I just get up the slide on the policy piece.
Thank you. My name is from the South African Weather Service. Thank you, Mike, for the presentation. Very loud and clear. I just want to, I'm interested on the last slide, actually. The last slide talks about replicability and sustainability. Scalability, replicability, and sustainability. I think I had Prof. Tafadzwa explaining all the challenges that they went through for the past 5 years, trying to put things together. So it's not a wise move to reinvent the wheel that is already in existence. So how do we replicate the successes of this project here in other provinces? And also lastly, wanting to check through the process there, you indicated that the consultants, I think, are already appointed. Now the process going forward of engaging the process to make sure that no one is left behind. If you can just touch on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of scalability, replicability, sustainability, and making sure we embed the lessons, that's what we're here to do. As this group, make sure those are written up into our documents that can be shared with others. And then, as Maddie said, in the design, there's lots of things that we've learned. Some of it is in our heads at the moment, but to make sure that is written down. Suppose the project team is talking about writing a policy paper on everything we've learned and making sure that it makes its way into the design of this project. There's already things right now off the top of our head that we know should have been done differently, should have been done in a different way from a governance perspective. Different partnerships should have been formed. So in the design is the time to make sure that all those things are incorporated. And as I think Tafadzwa mentioned it earlier, designing in a way that already can be scaled, as we go, and that's happening through the URP. But I think it's important to make sure that happens, continually throughout the process. And that's why the design is so careful. And as Mandy said, the consultants are there, to bring their knowledge of what the GCF requires, what's happened in other GCF projects. But it's really up to us as a group, not Sandy, not just the project leads, but as an interested reference group and an interested group of stakeholders to make sure that the way the project is designed meets the needs and is scalable, replicable, and sustainable. Your next question was about the consulting process. Did you say, yeah? So the consultants at the moment are coming up with a work plan, and that will include a range of provincial level consultations, some initial check-ins with the provinces, generally the Department of Agriculture and Environment in whatever format that is in each of the 4 provinces, and they will dictate who the stakeholders and the relevant groups to consult in those provinces are. And as we get closer to the ground, of course, those groups will get more and more refined. But at the same time, there's still an opportunity for the national level input through the reference group and through other mechanisms. We'll present that project. So at the moment, the consultants are going to design us the 9-month process. We have the opportunity to redefine that and say, no, we think we need longer here, longer there. And the reference group is a chance to do that. So Radzani, you're on the reference group, so please bring your ideas. And I know there's a couple of other people who have expressed interest in this group, and we welcome that. Of course, the reference group has to be key partners, but conversations can happen not only there, but around that as well. So yeah, I think inputs, partnerships, involvements, participatory processes are all going to be key to designing a project that works.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And just for all of you, we want you to hold us to account as SANBI. You heard me banging the drum about direct access and how I really do believe that this is the way we should be developing these projects. But it doesn't work if we are a direct access entity on paper and not in practice. So hold us to account. You know where to find us. Okay, I can think there's another burning question at the back there. Let's have that, and then we'll move on to the policy recommendations piece.
Thanks for giving me that opportunity. My name is Ndabu Majola. I'm with the Built Environmental Support Group. Sorry, Mike, I've got to put you back on the stand. Do you have any evaluation programs regarding the URP, which are probably not from someone who's not part of the program, evaluating the whole program, and from that evaluation drawing lessons, so that probably as you scale it up, we could learn from that. Can I just slot in another question?
Okay, squeeze it in, quick.
No, it's fine. You made me lose my track.
All right, as Lungi would say, what were you saying yesterday? No more ideas, they've been said already. Okay. So there is a terminal evaluation that will happen for this project. I'm just going to answer on behalf of Mike to make it a bit more. So when you do these big projects, what's required is independent evaluations. And there was one that was done at midterm. It was a bit before midterm because we didn't know the project would be so long. And at the moment, there's a procurement process underway to hire consultants to do the terminal evaluation. We actually hoped they would be hired already and that they would be part of these proceedings, but you know, government and institutional procurement sometimes takes a bit longer. So we're hoping to have them on board by the middle of August, and then they'll work in the months after that. And part of their job will be to interview some of us that are in the room today and really try and feedback from their perspective some of the lessons. But of course, that's not the only place. So you've heard Tafatswa speak about the learning products that are coming out of this program. And hopefully those learning products will also be distilling some of the lessons. Yes, Tafatswa? Yes? Okay, nodding. And then of course, one of the very important learning products are the policy briefs. Okay, so that brings us very nicely into this section now. And what we want to do is something that's been done in some of the other sessions that have been held in this room. And we'd like you to break into small groups with the people that are around you and to answer these questions for 20 minutes. What do you recommend for the road ahead as we move into the development of the projects? And who is the message for? Okay, and those of you that are going policy, that sounds so fancy, okay? All it is a suggestion for someone who has the power to make decisions or to influence the rules with which we work. Okay, now some of them are in the room today. DFFE, they make policy. Faith and colleagues, they make policies. If you really want to influence policy, go talk to them directly. SANBI gives policy advice to DFFE. Adaptation Network advocates for different kinds of policies. All right, so all of us are in this policy space playing different roles, but of course, all of us are interested in what do our stakeholders think? What should we be advancing? So if we can do that, is the process clear? Yeah, okay, so if we can do that, if you can get into groups with the people around you, and then in 20 minutes time, we're going to send the mic around and collect up the policy recommendations from the different groups. And then Tafatswa has promised that he's going to look at all of those and integrate them into the policy briefs that are emerging from the work that's happening behind the scenes. Yes, Tafatswa, I'm not making it up. Yeah, I'm not making it up. Okay, all right, so you can get into groups for the next 20 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Good morning, colleagues. I think for those who are interested, I think we can also use this opportunity as the people are on the online to also make recommendations. I myself was one of the privileged people to be part of the URP, and there's a number of recommendations that I would like to recommend going forward. I don't know if there are any in this platform who would also like to make recommendations. Okay, if there's no one, maybe if something comes up, you can put it on the chat box and they can have access to it. I'll do the same from my side.
Futhi, this is Penny in Cape Town. Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Fantastic. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
Good. Futhi, the presentation from Kafatswa and then leading into Mike's presentation just reminded me of some work that Rhodes University with the Early Learning Resource Center, or no, environmental, what's it, ELRC, environmental something, it might be Environmental Learning Resource Center, something like that, but the acronym is the ELRC or the ERLC, something like that. Anyway, they've done some interesting work with small-scale farmers in the Eastern Cape, quite a long-lasting program, and that might be useful to connect into, you know, just as one of the stakeholders that are being consulted as this program is being scaled into the Eastern Cape, and I'm thinking of the EBA Farm project. It definitely fits quite nicely with that work, and that work was done in a number of different areas in the Eastern Cape. So I would just like to join those dots. Thank you.
Thank you, Penelope. So I will add it into the list that I'm going to drop on the box. And maybe when they're reading them up, they might ask us to just elaborate a bit, and maybe you can be available to just give context to that project.
Sure, will do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Penelope, since you, I hope you have seen the message that's coming from Christine. So maybe let me share my ones as well, and then we can use the opportunity to feedback, thinking about those coming from my side and yourself, and the other colleagues are also welcome to make recommendations. So from my side, the one element that I really felt that was supposed to be part of the uMngeni Resilience project, which was part of, but indirectly, and was not really utilized to its full potential, This project is a multi-stakeholder project, multidisciplinary, and the key element or the huge element that came out was the early warnings, as well as the smart agriculture, climate smart agriculture, of which climate smart agriculture or sustainable agriculture or food security will never be successful, or will never happen unless there is water security. So the issue of water security, water resources management, was something that was lacking, and we could have used this project to also integrate it in, as we also know that within our area of operation, and it's nationwide, it's not just in KZN, but it's also in other provinces where we've seen issues of water scarcity, we've seen issues of degrading land use that is affecting our water resources. And with agriculture uses water as an input to be able to be sustainable or to be able to ensure produce. But at the same time, agriculture has impacts on water resources through use of fertilizers. We get nutrients that affects the water quality. And therefore, this project could have also been used as an opportunity to educate our communities, our stakeholders about the importance of water management. Another element, agriculture uses a lot of water. It's one of the biggest users in the sector in terms of in terms of irrigation. So water use efficiency also becomes critical. So if we are promoting climate smart agriculture, there's no way we can ignore the issues of water conservation and demand management as well as water use efficiency. So those are some of the points that I would like to see coming through in the upscaling, because this project have done well in terms of looking at systems and an integrated approach, but we've missed an opportunity to also highlight the one key element, which is an input, and that we should ensure that is included in the bigger picture of the project and integrated. We don't have to have a separate element, but it needs to be integrated. And we have lessons that are in capacity building that is coming through that process. And in that way, we can have that notion of food, water, energy nexus being implemented, because it's already something that was aligned to this process with the energy, solar in the Tazuga project, the food component, but the water was lacking. So this is an opportunity for me. And I think they were talking about the lack of private partnerships, public-private partnerships. Through our projects, we were in water. We had an opportunity to develop the flood early warning system. And that system was developed through a partnership between uMngeni Water and a private sector company, which actually developed and had the specialist expertise for the project. So that's one of the public-private partnerships that I also think they should recognize, because it can also play an important role in the multi-hazard early warning system that they alluded to as part of the scaling up. So those were some of my observations and maybe recommendations, and they are going to SANBI as an implementing entity, but also to just the overall URP projects, because when we talk resilience, when we talk about resilient communities, there's no way we can divorce water from that conversation. It needs to be part and parcel of it. Thank you. Okay, I see the comments from Bridget. Municipalities need to address basic service provision in areas where project activities are implemented. Otherwise, the communities will always have other priorities. Municipalities, together with other service providers, need to engage with communities about safe use of natural water resources, creating awareness. I think that is in line with what I was also saying, Bridget. Thank you for that.
I think, colleagues, building on both your comments, both you, Futhi, and Bridget, the one of the kind of questions around answering what's been posed to us for this group work, for me, always comes out as the municipalities being basically broke. So there's very little income coming in for the municipalities, and with more and more people going off grid, there's less and less income for them. So it's like a vicious sort of negative cycle. And yeah, I just wonder, you know, Bridget, around your, like, municipalities need to address basic needs, basic services. Yes, they do, and they're mandated to, and it's in our Bill of Rights and Constitution and all of that. But how they do that is very tricky from a point where often they are not in a good state. So how do we utilize programs like this to bring in the local municipalities and look at their resilience as well, because they are actually very vulnerable as institutions. Often there's a lot of there's these kind of different factors. The one thing is that, as I said, there's less and less income, so they rely on income. They rely on the sales of electricity and water for income, besides the property rates. And if that is decreasing because there's less, or because there's less electricity available, or because people are going off grid, all of that erodes their income stream. Then there's questions of kind of corruption, and that also eroding their fiscus, basically their financial position. So their position in as far as providing services is actually often it's not a strong position at all. How do we bolster that position? Because that's they're such a key part of the basic service delivery component. Often in these projects, we do like water does. When it hits a block, it kind of flows around, and we flow around and end up, you know, basically making those, further eroding the importance of those municipalities, further eroding their income streams by just doing our own thing, which in a way we have to do. But how do we include these sort of difficult discussions?
Thank you, Penelope. I saw Bridget may have a direct response, maybe, or maybe she wants to continue where you left off, maybe with the conversation. Bridget, please come in.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to respond to that, because I mean, yes, we all know that municipalities are battling to meet their service provision mandates, and that's true, and it's all very well, but it's very hard to be talking about river health when people don't have water, which is, you know, the case in Bulendlela, where systems aren't in place that should be, money has been spent, so, and yet the water provision isn't in place. So we've either got to try and work together with the municipalities to try and address some of those basic issues, but we can't ignore them and blame it on the fact that there are no resources and then think we can really have ownership. So yeah, I'm not sure how we do it, but I think that we can't ignore basic needs and try and do other work. So somehow we've got to build it in. And maybe it needs a whole discussion about how resources can contribute or how we can work together. But yeah, I just wanted to raise it. Thanks.
Thank you, Bridget. I think you raised a very important point, because when we talk how are we talking resilient without even thinking about whether people are getting basic services? Because what makes us resilient is to have the basic services that we need on a daily basis. And if we do not have local municipalities presented in this conversation and in these projects, then it means we may be missing a boat or there's a gap that we need to fill in. And this is also an opportunity to support municipalities, because if they are in this space, they are able to share what are some of their challenges and how can these projects be designed in such a way that those challenges somehow are addressed, but not maybe entirely addressed, but we contribute to addressing those issues. The one thing that came to my mind is when you mentioned the lack of water services in Vulindlela, it is a crisis in terms of service delivery if a community that is so close to a local municipality and is not getting water. But the one thing we know about Vulindlela as well is that Vulindlela is very rich in groundwater resources in the form of springs. How can we bring that into these projects, because they're already using those springs? How can we use those as alternatives for water services? How can we augment those systems, ensure that there's springs protection and they can be utilized for actual water service provision without having to go through the bulk water service, and they can service themselves, but ensure that it is in a good water quality standards that are recognized by the South African national standards in terms of water quality. So this is an opportunity, because already communities are adapting in that way, but they need to be supported, and that needs to be recognized. And projects like this is something that we can utilize this space to ensure that there is that recognition, and it's a way of adaptation in itself. Yeah, so I think we've got something that we can feedback on. At local municipal level, there is very limited capacity around environmental management. This needs to be looked at, because environmental management ends up becoming less of a priority. Okay, yeah, that is one of the challenges I think that is prevalent within the municipalities. And I think environmental management at municipalities tends to be only limited at commenting to environmental impact assessments that are normally for development, and they are not fully utilized to also look at some of the environmental challenges that are within their municipalities. And I think it's something that needs to be a point of engagement with our municipalities, to also look at that component. Should not only be directed to planned development, but it also needs to be directed to operations and the sustainable living within our municipalities. It's something that we really need to make sure that they also look at. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that is 1 minute, Lungi. All right, so we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups and an online group. That's what we've got. So if we can have a volunteer from the first group to give us your policy recommendations. And remember, we want to know what are your policy recommendations and who are they for? And then when we're done in the room, we'll hear from the online group as well. Okay, so Thabang, good luck. Okay, Stay, we'll give you the mic.
Good morning. Well, the name of our group is the Green Beans because our chief executive officer here is a green bean. I thought I should start with that. And our recommendations, just a few to be quick so that I don't waste time. One was on the climate change bill, and it's snail pace, the agency thereof, and this is the message to the Parliament of South Africa. Number 2, on the frameworks and strategies. So we heard that there's no silver bullet, and therefore they need to be locally guided. For example, if you're in Limpopo and in KwaZulu-Natal, no same strategies would apply. So it's apples and pineapples. And this is for national government to consider. And then around institutional arrangements, so better communication functionality as well around arrangements, issues around governance as well there, locally led, they need to be locally guided, right? And this is now for project developers. And then we have issues around traditional leadership, and this stems from issues around sustainability, that, you know, it can be a make or break in a project. And therefore, this is the whole thing also around ownership, right? And this is also for project developers, but also for national government. So there are internal issues there to resolve between traditional leadership and government and those structures, right? And then an important one around platforms, you know, for participants that have been involved in projects to share some learnings, right? And this one would be specifically for the project team here on how we can create that. As an example, recognition of the indigenous knowledge systems. And then there's one around ownership. I think it's covered, it's part of the sustainability in project development. And then the other important one is consciously involving youth in capacity building and in these projects. And this is also for project developers and for the project team. Okay, and this is the last one, and this is an important one, and for my friend Kate, who's the ward councillor. But again, this local government and to enforce bylaws, you know, in hindsight, you will be dealing with all the other issues that we've had around attribution, and not attributing to climate change, but human-induced things. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Thabang. Can I also ask rapporteurs, this is Terry sitting at the front here, capturing your recommendations after the session. If you can just go to Terry and just check that what she's captured is what you meant, or if it must be tweaked slightly. Terry, then we'll get it done today, because we don't want to lose these as the policy briefs are emerging. So thanks very much, Thabang. And I like that you picked up some of the best practice, not just some, you know, not just the things that were broken and that needed to be fixed. So that's fantastic. Okay, next group. Who's volunteering? Thank you, Ellen.
The downside of taking lots of notes. So our first message was for actually our national departments and just noting that a number of different departments involved in projects like this, like agriculture, water, DFFE, etc., and the different levels of government are also relevant. But sustainability does require government getting on board. And part of that process of creating ownership is by putting in co-funding. So we also noted that it's important that they put these sorts of requirements into their budgets. We had a further discussion around including these sorts of projects in their planning from the outset to build it into their IDPs, their budgets. And these are longer term projects that we're looking at, and that's specifically at district and local government level. Then at the national level, this is probably also targeting Parliament. We said that these projects need to align with existing government policies, but on the flip side, local stakeholders also need to be involved in the sectoral policy review process, discussing that the adaptation strategies are currently being reviewed, but that also includes hearing the voices of farmers in the policy review process. And we thought that those decision makers need to better learn how to listen to those voices. We had some reflections on the climate change bill hearings and the experiences of farmers who did try to speak up there and didn't feel like it was a forum where they could be heard. So perhaps some capacity building is also required for the officials there. Then the importance of champions. This goes to all the levels. Within each department and at community level, we feel this is an important aspect to make success of these sorts of projects. I think we already talked about the role of local government in projects is critical. We had some discussion around who would best host these projects, given the difficulties around contracting and procurement with local government. And that led us to a conclusion that there's quite a lot of need for flexibility. So the point that was made this morning about having a national institution that is channeling this funding to us, that direct access mechanism is quite important to give us the flexibility that's required to shift things as we go along. And then a final point at the district and local level, we said we need a mechanism to get the project commitment, to get the project embedded, even when there are changes at the local government level. So I'm not quite sure how we do that, but political changes often happen, but we need that support to be lasting throughout the lifespan of the project and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, team number 2. And Ellen, very interesting, the last point you made links to the first point. If you think about the slide that you put up, which was that in the climate bill, there's a requirement to embed your climate change responses into local government strategies and plans. So it starts to give you that loop. I don't know where Faith is there. She is also coming. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So next group, if we can have, please.
Thank you very much. As this group, we realized that policy formulation cannot be done in 20 minutes.
So is that a policy recommendation? We need more time for policy recommendations.
And in a relatively noisy environment where everybody is trying to have their voice heard. But we did think we should put these points. We should think that whoever will be taking will be able to be concretized into something that makes sense. So it might be a jumble of points at this stage, but please bear with us. Stakeholder analysis, we think it's something that whoever will be thinking about that should probably emphasize on that and strengthen it. I mean, we do realize that there are stakeholders that we believe could have been here, but we should all see actively participating. Coming from a Department of Agriculture, I'm not happy with them in terms of them participating in this at all levels, right across. Agriculture has been mentioned several times here. The other resources that could have been obtained by having such stakeholders participating actively, we even thought of Department of Public Works, their EPWP programs and all those things. Traditional authority, which is very strong in KZN, we don't see it very active at this stage. But what does that mean in terms of policy? It's up to the professor to think how we'll be able to put that in place. South African Water Services. And then when we talk about government and all that thing, and it's very good to hear that there's thinking about legislation, because if you want to put government into action, the stick should be the legislation. What legislation? What does it intend to do? We don't have answers for that, but somebody should think about how legislation to take us forward in this regard. The cost of upscaling. Are we going to rely on donors for upscaling? What is the role of the South African government in driving upscaling and solving its own problems? So somebody should think about that. Impact assessment. What impact is what we are doing at this stage having? It's nice to see things becoming green, going to the market and everything, but what in the long run? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And what an amazing group of, what an amazing set of policy recommendations in the noisy, messy space. So thanks very much to that group for that. Stay, yes, we can go to, this is the little group? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we got skipped. Sorry. So there were a few themes that came out of our discussion. I think the one was around stakeholder engagement. And there we spoke, and I suppose this is directed maybe at project developers, really being proactive about engagement with NGOs, but also I think it came through in some of the inputs around the private sector. The banks and the insurance sectors, as difficult and challenging as it can be to engage, are really important sectors that are starting to show a lot of interest in this space. So that was the one comment, but also in relation to stakeholder engagement, and I think this came through strongly yesterday, was when you're developing projects that a community needs assessment needs to be done right from the outset. And communities need to be involved in the design of the project. So I think that's been recognized, but just to re-emphasize that. There was a strong theme around, I think, knowledge management and learning, which I imagine would be directed to national, but also possibly to SANBI. And a suggestion around strengthening some kind of repository of project knowledge and learnings. And there was a specific recommendation to SANBI to learn from the Living Catchments project. So apparently, someone's dancing because there have apparently been some really important learnings in terms of things like how to draw communities in from the beginning. The other big theme was around alignment, and I suppose this would be directed a lot to the national government, national departments, DFFE, Department of, what is yours called? Science and Innovation, DSI. Sorry, showing my ignorance. But the two specific examples there around alignment were for DFFE and DSI to align themselves and work together more closely and co-create programs, specifically in the innovation space. So DSI is very much in the research and innovation arena, and DFFE obviously more in the policy and possibly implementation space, and they need to be working a lot better together. And then in the context of the GCF proposal, the need for SANBI to engage with DBSA. So there was a sort of reference to the two entities, but it's such a critical space to be aligning and understanding what's happening in and being funded in the built infrastructure space and the ecological infrastructure space. The other theme was around capacity development, and we spoke about that across different levels. So from very much community level, so making sure that, and I think this has come through quite strongly, that people who are on the ground are capacitated to continue work beyond the lifespan of a project. But we also spoke about it at other levels. A theme that's come across a lot is the space is incredibly complex. And so complex systems thinking, are we training people at universities to think about how we pull all these really difficult things together? So that's probably directed not only at project developers, but possibly at our tertiary institutions, but also, I suppose, looking for ways within project funding opportunities to see how that kind of capacity can be more proactively developed, because we need to retain that here in our country and develop it. And then I think the last theme was just around, and maybe this is directed at project developers, the importance of it. And I think it's a theme that's come through a lot, interdisciplinarity. in project teams, because, you know, the challenges we face require very different forms of knowledge. I mean, someone talked about sort of indigenous knowledge, but there's a range of knowledge systems that we need to be drawing from. And the more we can be careful about how we construct project teams, bringing different knowledge systems together, but also that helps sometimes in translating, and I don't mean language translation, but making concepts more easily understandable to a broader range of people who are involved in implementation. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Another really rich set of policy recommendations. Okay, Esther, big group at the back.
Hopefully I'm going to manage to say everything because it was a lengthy conversation. But a few things came up from our group, but the main one was about finding innovative ways to secure infrastructure within rural areas, the issue of theft and having to ensure that the technology that is put in place in the rural areas is protected, finding safe spaces within the communities, involving traditional authorities in making policies, and before involving them, or when you start to find innovative ways, you need to first have a comprehensive analysis of the existing content. What has the community done when it comes to safety themselves, and when you bring in the policy, how do you align those two things? Another point that came up was, I think it also has been said, was the alignment of project planning and also incorporating projects into IDPs. And another point that came up in our group was the safeguarding of rangelands, which means you need to involve traditional authorities working together with DALRAD and DFFE, because when we were at Vulindlela, we had an issue, or it was brought up that traditional authorities are allowing people to construct big houses within rangeland. So now you need to formulate policies around that to ensure that you're safeguarding. But in doing that, you need to work together with the traditional authorities and municipalities. I hope I brought everything up. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And another rich set, and you can see that there's overlaps in what's coming from the groups, right? So it's telling us what's common in terms of the priorities of this group of stakeholders anyway, in terms of the policy recommendations. So I think we've got one more group in the room. Am I right? Is there just one group here and then the online group? Yeah, so Steph, if we can have the mic here for this group. What? You were the first group. Okay. Sorry, because you didn't say living catchments when you were in this group. So I thought you hadn't actually had your turn yet. So this is the Sandby Living Catchments team for the Living Catchments recommendation group, just to bring you into the inside joke. All right. So online group, how are we doing that? Christine? Okay. Putti, where are you?
Hi, Mandy, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can certainly hear you.
I'm so sorry, is it loud?
Yeah, it's very loud. Let's see if we can get your picture. Audiovisual team, are we waiting for a picture? There we go. Thanks, shot. Okay, Putti, go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we also had a conversation here on the online group. The one missing element that we actually felt was missing in the URP project, which we think is very important. If we're talking resilience, if we're talking adaptation, there's no way we can divorce the conversation around water resources management. So we need to make sure that in future upscaling, we do include water resources management as part of the major themes into the project. The reason why that's important is because we had one of the key themes looking at climate smart agriculture, and that was looking at has water as one of the biggest inputs into it. That means that irrigation is being one of the users that is resulting as a result of our climate smart agriculture. But we need to use this opportunity to teach our communities around water use efficiency and water conservation and demand management, so as to ensure that we integrate that into this platform as well. And how can we also ensure that this also promotes the use of recycled water from our wastewater treatment plants? This is something that is emerging and is already happening. We do have our Davil, as uMngeni water, Davil wastewater treatment plant it's reclaiming its water, and it would need collaboration with farmers to use that water in the agricultural systems. So we do need to also bring that in. We know our area of operation, it's not just within the uMngeni catchments, but it's also nationally. There's a serious issue around water resources management, where we've got declining catchment yield, we've got deteriorating water quality. And this is an opportunity to also educate our communities within these projects to ensure that they play their role in terms of water resources management. Another one, which I think could have been a missed opportunity, we've got DFFE as the project holder, if I may say so. And we've got serious issues around alien invasive plants. We know there are interventions, but these projects, if they can also integrate alien invasive awareness as well as interventions, I think it's something that can be useful in future. And if you can include that into upscaling, it's something that can also be useful. There was also, the project was very much inclined to agriculture, but I don't think I've seen the Departments of Agriculture, and I think we do need to have them on board, same as the Departments of Water and Sanitation around the water security components. And there was also a recommendation, since the Green Climate project is going to be going to Eastern Cape. There's a project that was done by Rhodes University, where they were also working with small holder farmers. And there was a recommendation that you touch base with Rhodes University on this. And please contact Penelope. She's here online, and I think she's already contacted you, Mandy, and Mike on this one, so that you try and align to the processes that are already existing on the ground. Another one which came from Bridget is how can we also ensure that we include municipalities into these projects? The URP implementation was done at a municipal local level, at ward-based level, but how much involvement of the municipalities have we done? And we know the serious issues around service delivery from our municipalities. How can we bring them on board and they can learn from the initiatives that were part of the uMngeni Resilience Project, and they can even build onto those initiatives as part of sustainability or as part of something that they can take forward as municipalities, because we know the challenge is there. And I think another one which is key is that of climate resilience conversations that we need to have on a continuous basis. How do we ensure that we've got those conversations on a continuous basis and not just ending here at Indaba? From national up until the community level, we may see an increase in awareness in our communities, but the reality on the ground is that people are still very much not aware of what this really means when we talk about climate change and their role. We've seen this with the early warning systems in terms of how they are unaware of how they need to be responding should there be a flood or should there be a drought in their own communities. This is a start, but it needs to continue and ensure that people on the ground really understand what this means if we really are going to be building resilient communities. There are more comments on the online platform, and I think it would be great if you can also incorporate those. Thank you.
Two people online still at the end of this. So, I mean, really an incredible amount of commitment and energy and staying power from all of you online and all of us in the room. And it's been amazing. So process going forward on this, just to show you that this is not going nowhere. One of the outcomes of the uMngeni Resilience Project is a set of policy briefs that are currently being developed. All of these ideas that have come are going to make their way into the policy briefs. So that's why we're madly scribing and trying to get it all down. Please, those of you that reported, if you can just find Terry when the session breaks for lunch and just go and make sure that what she has is what you said. She's trying, we've got other people collecting as well, and we're recording, but if we can just close that loop. And I'm not sure, Christine, or who can give us the transcript from the comments that have been online, but it would be great if we can get those as well. And then those policy briefs, once they're done with all of your comments, are going to be sent to everybody for you to have a final set of comments and another series of consultation processes up until, so when, the middle of August, right? When we want to have them done. Okay, so that's where we're heading. And as I said, hold us to account, right? Including the professor. Okay. Okay, so I think that then brings this session to a close. Thank you all very much for your inputs. And let me hand over to Tafatswa to take us to lunch.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mandy, for facilitating this last and final session, which brings us to the end of the climate change endeavor. I was listening quite keenly to the recommendations that were coming out from the different groups in terms of policy recommendations, some of them more linked to practice and how we can better operationalize things. We have documented those and we will incorporate them into the policy briefs that we are developing. And hopefully you get a chance to also comment on those briefs before we finalize them. They form one of the outcomes of the uMngeni Resilience Project. So do be on the lookout for those briefs. And if you can find time, we'll be very happy to get your feedback. Coming to the end of the show, I'm just looking around. I don't see my people here, they've disappeared. Oh, Nopai, can you stand up? Oh, Ketiwe is here. I'm going blind. Nopai, Ketiwe, Vanji, Christine. Where's Christine hiding? She's outside. Yeah. And the technical team, James and crew. So first I must thank James and crew. I do abuse them quite frequently. It has even gotten worse that now I even lend them to people. Dansila is laughing. She knows when they're doing the ecological infrastructure thing, I'm like, okay, James will come. But they're a really fantastic group. They always show up and support our events. They have supported the URP since inception, since the first workshops that we started doing. The first workshop that we did on early warning systems in 2016. They were there, they were helming the show. And earlier this week, when I arrived, James was showing me how much their tech has improved. Yeah, he was showing me their, inverter, their UPS. It's like, we're not going to have what we had in Limpopo here. Yeah. So I got a backup, you didn't. Yeah. But yeah, next time the backup is now there. But they've really been fantastic in terms of supporting us. A lot of events like this require a conference or events management company. I've never been to one of those. When SAN became, and they're like, this thing has to be big, it's national, so it's not a village conference. Yeah, normally I organize those sort of things like the field visits. So like, this is not a field visit. It's national, big people coming. Yeah. So they're like, get an events management company. I went to Christine. And I said, Christine, there's this conference. And it was quite late. I think it was end of March or so. Said that there's this thing that we have to do. Please make it happen. And as she'll tell you, I then went away after that and resurfaced this week. And then to my team, Nopai, who is here, she coordinates our center in the university, the day-to-day runnings. So she gets terrorized by me quite a lot. Yes, I tend to go around making promises, saying, yes, that will happen, we'll do that. Yeah, so like every time when I'll talk to Mandy and Tim, and they're like, we want this, I'm like, it will happen. And then afterwards, I'll just drop an email and say, no, Pai, I committed to this. But too late now, just make it happen. Like, but Tafads got procurement and this. Like, too late now, just do something. Ketiwa here was running around trying to get the field visits, in place, up and running. So those field visits that you guys went to on the first day, she was really, behind those, ensuring everything was ready, the logistics and everything. I just sit at the end of the pipeline where I sign things and click approve, on the slide. And sometimes I don't sign them, I send them back. I'm like, I might know there's a conference happening, but I'm like, I need a motivation and a detailed one. Yeah, so it's not easy for them. They've worked under a lot of pressure. So can we just give them a big round of applause? Yeah. And Lungi, if you don't mind. So it would be unfair for me not to thank her, because before she left the URP, that's when we brainstormed the idea of merging the 3 national policy conferences into the climate change Indaba. And then she left soon after that, in the January that followed. But that idea had been sort of developed then to merge them. And then we just carried forward with that vision. Is Lindo in here? Or he's gone out? Lindo was then the next person that I harassed to write the concept note for the Indaba. I just said, Lindo, I promise that, we'll do this Indaba. We just put something together. Sanbi needs to see something. And he diligently did so. And, here we are, we've had these 3 days. So the URP is really a product of a team that works tirelessly, long hours, weekends, and it takes a lot of dedication for the work to happen. A lot of the things that have happened have happened and have been able to be achieved and be sustained because the people who are working on the project had a more personal commitment to it. So it was not just a job to them, but it was a calling and a passion. They found themselves, they found meaning in it. And in my closing remarks, that's where I want to come to say, when we deal with climate change and we work with communities, we are working with people, we are working with the environment, people and planet, I always like to say. They are real and genuine issues that we are trying to address. And there are real implications if they are not addressed in time. And there's an agency to address them because we are already running behind. So it's not something that we can postpone to next year or another time when it suits us. So there's a real agency to address it because it is affecting people on the ground on a daily basis in many ways than we could ever imagine ourselves. There's a need for us to put aside our differences and rally behind a common goal and a common vision. We come from different walks of life. We come from different backgrounds. We have different opinions, cultures, and all of that. One thing I've learned from leading a team is that diversity is, the hotbed for innovation. So if you lack diversity, it's very difficult to innovate. If you've got diversity, innovation comes in naturally. It's very easy to come up. So the fact that we are very different and the fact that we have different interests and agendas means that we are a very diverse group and we can innovate in that space. We can think, we can be agile. Prof. Mafongoya likes to talk about, sustainability and agility, and he coined this phrase that he likes to call sustainagility. Bring those two together. But we need each other. We need to work together across our different spheres, whether we're in policy, we're in research, we're in practice, wherever we are sitting, we need to come together. The URP is an example of what can be achieved when people come together, when people listen to each other. I was joking throughout about bashing heads with people and all of those things. I was not joking, really. We did bash heads. We continue to bash heads. We have said very tough things to each other along the way. Some have threatened to walk away. Some have said, I don't want to see you again. But, we still came back after those things were said. Sometimes it would take someone sending a calming email in the midst of very hot emails. Someone would just, put in a detente to say, let's calm things down. So it's going to be hard. That's what I'm trying to say. It's going to be hard to come together and work together, but it can be done. And when we do it, there's real impact on the ground. And those are the lessons that we've been sharing. And if we come together as a much bigger community than what the URP was, you can then imagine the scale of change that could be realized. The URP was looking at 3 wards, in 3 municipalities in Umngeni. Yeah, but it gave us so many lessons that it occupied us for 3 days. 3 wards in KZN in one particular district, 3 local municipalities. So you can imagine if we come together at a national level, the scale of the impact that could be realized and achieved. And it's possible, it has been done, we just need the strength and the interest to take it forward as a community of practice. So again, I'll challenge our principals from DFFE and SANBI. So let's keep this momentum. Let's not wait 10 years for the GCF to conclude. And then we say, let's have another Indaba, after 10 years time to share the lessons from the GCF project. There are always lessons that need to be shared. There's a lot that is happening in this space. There are a lot of projects that are being implemented in many areas that we need to give voice to, that we need to give space to, for them to be shared and the lessons to be transmitted in a similar manner as we've done today for the uMngeni Resilience Project. So if anything, that would be my call and my request to say, let us find ways of sustaining this. And I'm making myself available, and Christine and others.
Okay, so three more thank yous from me. So first of all, a thank you to the SANBI team also, who are all around, and especially to Marilyn, who I want to stand up if she's here, who organized the celebratory gala dinner, okay, which was amazing. Marilyn, there she is. So let us give you a round of applause. She's hiding there. Okay, then I want for all of you to give yourselves a round of applause because you are amazing. And then finally, one thank you that I have to make, because there's one person who has been the glue of this project from the very beginning until now. And if we're honest, the wings would have fallen off the plane a very long time ago if we didn't have this one person and his leadership and his vision and his dedication and his wisdom. And I can write you a whole dictionary of adjectives, Tafadzwa, to you. So if you can stand up, if we can just acknowledge you. Yeah, so thank you, everybody, and we'll invite you to join us for lunch. Please remember